Hello and welcome. Tonight on Bread Theory, we are going to be continuing on where we left off last time. I had a bit of a shorter midweek stream, kind of unusual for me, and we were looking at the movie Taken for a Ride, which is about how the various auto industries like GM, and then the other companies such as Firestone Tires and Standard Oil and a few other ones literally colluded together to dismantle the mass transit system across the country for the U.S. And they got fined for this. They went before the court for antitrust, but since there was not really any precedent for taking over and dismantling mass transit systems, and I guess the U.S. as a whole, on a federal level, didn't really value mass transit systems all that much, they were let off the hook with basically a slap on the wrist. Not even that. I think one of the companies got fined. I think they mentioned just $1 for their wrongdoing. So, yeah, despite having antitrust laws, they did nothing to stop this sort of thing. And to this day, the car reigns king, thanks to basically this whole propaganda effort to discredit other forms of mass transit. We looked at how they would buy up streetcar lines across the country, especially in places like LA, which used to have, believe it or not, one of the best mass transit systems in the country, a streetcar line on every major street throughout the city. They would buy up these lines and they would decommission the old streetcars and just burn them, because they were wooden for the most part, and they would replace them with what they were claiming was the wave of the future in the form of these buses. And they were taking an electric system, so more efficient in terms of energy use overall, because you don't have a bunch of small combustion engines. Of course, you still have the source power being likely coal or natural gas or that sort of thing, but still overall less polluting, especially at the source. And they were replacing it with these buses that ran on diesel. And there was absolutely no reason, as we were talking about last time, there was no reason that they had to run these buses on diesel. As has been shown in places like San Francisco, you can just have overhead lines and run buses on electric, even with the same technology they had in the 50s and 60s. No problem at all. But they chose diesel deliberately to make it noisy, to make it polluting, stinky, just this unpleasant experience all around. And then in the name of profit motive, they started reducing service on those bus lines to make it even less desirable of an option. And really the whole idea was to get people out of mass transit and into cars, which they could sell a whole lot more for you. They can sell now oil changes and tire rotations and new parts every time something breaks. It's very costly to keep up a car, even compared to taking mass transit daily, just over time with gas, insurance, and then replacing parts, the normal wear and tear of a car. It's a lot more costly to own a car, and that means good things for these private entities. So Tonight we're going to look at part 2 of the series, Taken for a Ride. I'm going to bring that up right now. Maybe I'll switch myself to this mode here. Makes it a little bit smaller. So maybe back there. And we're gonna see where the story goes from this point, where things are in a pretty abysmal state, and a lot of lines have been taken out at this point and replaced. And yeah. Oh, and keep in mind, this documentary was made in '96, so it's over 20 years old now. A lot has happened since then, and in many ways, a lot has not happened. A lot of these lines have just never been rebuilt. Places like LA, they have some pretty sparse mass transit, but it's nowhere near a full and robust system. And despite how many lanes they add to the highways and how many parking spaces they add to an area, all the car infrastructure does not make it less congested. And the reason being that cars take up a lot of space per person moved. And not only do they take up space while they're driving. Hello, Seize the Minis, how are you? We're going to be talking about mass transit and how it was systematically dismantled by a bunch of car companies and interested parties that sold services and parts to those cars. So anyway, so the car takes up space not only while it's driving, but then you have to find a place to park it. So it's taking up space there too. All of these things push things apart. And not only does that mean that you have to drive more. Oh, great. I'm glad it sounds good for you. Not only does that mean that you have to drive more as things get spread apart through this car infrastructure. Good evening, Natalie. Nice to see you again. So then you're relying on cars more. So now there's more cars on the road for more trips, and things just keep getting congested. And the prescription since this time of like the 60s and the 70s, when these things were finally completely demolished, these mass transit systems, the solution has always been, build more roads, build roads deep into the heart of cities, obliterate entire neighborhoods. Happened in St. Paul, the most prosperous black neighborhood, the Rondo neighborhood, was completely cut in half. Their central business district completely destroyed in the name of pushing a freeway through. And at a certain point, especially as a city dweller, I wonder if that's picking up on the microphone there. I have neighbors who have dogs, and anytime a emergency vehicle goes by, they just howl their heads off like they're in pain almost, but they're not. They don't like the sirens. Anyway, hopefully that's not too distracting. So where was I? So this Rondo neighborhood, they cut it right in half. And so at a certain point, especially as a city dweller, you have to ask yourself, who are cities for? Are they for cars and their infrastructure, or are they primarily for people? Because the way we build highways through cities, it's not for the people that live there. It may benefit the people that live there too. They can maybe get around easier than they otherwise would in a car. At least at certain times of day, at least in the off-peak times. Certainly not during rush hour, but in the off-peak times, you can get around more easily. But more than anything, these freeways are built for people that live in the suburbs. And it's little wonder that this sort of road building era happened right around the same time that white flight to the suburbs occurred. So all of a sudden, all these white people have moved out to the suburbs, all these people that still work in downtowns, and they're demanding that services be brought to them, rather than just, accepting the give and take of deciding where you live. If you live way out in the countryside, it's not going to be as easy to get to a major city. It's going to take longer. And if a whole bunch of people do that all at once, to the point where you have almost as much population in the suburbs as you do within the city itself, or in the case of Minneapolis, St. Paul, more people in the suburbs than live in those two cities combined, it's not hard to figure out that when most people still live, or when most people still work in the cities, that anytime they need to come into the city, a lot of other people are going to have that same idea, and things get congested. We used the analogy last time of it raining in the mountainside, like up in the mountains. A lot of rain all comes at once in the mountains, and the little tributaries form into bigger tributaries, which go into rivers and eventually causes flooding in the valley. And the same is true of traffic. A lot of people coming from these small, less dense areas, all concentrating in one space, eventually creates a traffic flood. But in the case of a traffic flood, there's just no extra place for the cars to go. Doesn't matter how many levels you add to the highway, how many lanes you add laterally, people are still going to the same few places, and they're still having to park in those same few places. So things get congested no matter what. So really the only alleviation for that situation is to have better mass transit systems, to get as many people as possible out of those cars. And it's difficult when you're dealing with a spread out population. Basically, your only options are to have like commuter rail or commuter bus lines at like park and ride sort of locations. So you're concentrating traffic into a more spread out area and then allowing people to come into the city. And that also helps cut down on the amount of parking spaces needed, which if you're someone who still needs to drive, is pretty good for you. And in fact, the people, this was something else that I brought up last time, in terms of branding, probably the best way to look at what mass transit does for a city is to think about the people that rely on their cars the most, the people that either just love to drive. There's no way they're going to ever get out of their car. You're going to have to pry the steering wheel from their cold, dead hands, those sorts of people. And then those that rely on it for their job. If you're some sort of a contractor, or like myself, a landscaper, which is a form of contracting, and you need a lot of tools, you need to be able to haul stuff around, you're not going to be able to do that by mass transit. That's just impractical. So, how do you market mass transit for the diehards? What would you say? Well, there's a number of things that make driving really unbearable. The first one is traffic. And even if you really love driving, I don't know anyone that loves a traffic jam. So really the only way to alleviate a traffic jam is to get people out of those cars into another system that doesn't compete for space with the traffic. And that can be a mass transit line. It could be an elevated mass transit line. It could be a subterranean one. Either way, getting it on a different level than the street traffic is going to make it so they're never, interacting in a way that cuts down the service for either one of them. So there's one, traffic, and that's a big one. If you're able to set up a mass transit system around your city and metro area that can serve enough people and be a whole, full functioning system that you can rely on day or night, weekend or weekday, holidays even, then you really have something that people can be comfortable with using instead of their cars. So that's one thing. What else upsets drivers? How about road construction? Well, of course, what causes road construction more than anything is wear on the road. The more cars are on the road, the more wear there is. It's pretty simple. So again, the best way to reduce wear is to reduce the number of drivers. Get as many people out of the cars. And the same is true for another ill of driving or another hassle, and that's gas prices. If you don't like high gas prices, what's the number one way with any sort of commodity to reduce the price of it? Reduce demand. If you get people out of their cars and into mass transit, there's less local demand for gas and prices will fall. Again, another win for the diehard car drivers. And it goes on and on. Do you like driving around people that are texting while driving? Or drunk people? Or people that have to rely on their car but probably don't have the cognitive ability anymore due to age or just, sensory decline of some kind to really manage it safely? Do you enjoy driving around those people? I know that I don't. The best way to get those people off the road is to have a robust mass transit system that goes where people want to go. So pretty much any way you slice it, all the bad things about driving a car are alleviated by having as few people driving as possible. So that means that anyone that is a real huge road advocate or car advocate should also be a number one in terms of mass transit. They should be the biggest mass transit buff of them all, because it only helps them out in the long run. You can get into these more ancillary problems too. Employment. What's the best way to give people better access to employment? It's to get them better mobility. And if you don't have enough money to even have a reliable car in the first place, your choices of where to work are going to be very limited. It's basically going to be to where you can get to on a bus or a mass transit system. So if you want those people to have better job opportunities, again, you're going to want to have a better, more robust mass transit system. And on like that way. There's really no downside to good mass transit. The only downside to any mass transit is when it's done poorly, really, because that turns people off to it. But it's not too hard to make it more attractive. Another one that's not often thought about. I used to be a driver for people with disabilities. They had physical and cognitive disabilities to the point where they were not able to get themselves around in a private vehicle themselves. And I would drive them. It was not on demand. It was not wherever they wanted to go, but it was like between their house and the day center or their place of work and then back home. And that was about it. But because the idea with having more freedom of choice for these individuals with disabilities was to be able to have them live wherever they wanted to in the metro, that meant that a lot of times they're not living in places that have good mass transit. So when they're back at home, they're virtually isolated. So again, the best way to help those people as well, help them have more autonomy and more freedom in their life, is to have an alternative. And you want to talk about freedom and choices and all of those sorts of things that are talked about when we talk about cars. The most freedom and choice you can have is to have another option besides cars. If everything comes down to your choice is to have a car, and that's basically the only viable option, you don't have a meaningful alternative, and there is no choice. You're being pushed towards one thing. The best way to have choice, then, is to have a better, more viable option that is on par with the convenience and ease of a car. And again, that's mass transit. So I'll get down off my soapbox for the time being, and we'll get into the movie for tonight. As always, if there's any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Anything that's coming up that you're difficulty with, or you just want to comment on for whatever reason, feel free to. I always like a good, robust discussion. So yeah, let's take it away with Taken for a Ride, the history of the assault on public transport in the last century.
Citizens worked together to stop 17 urban freeways across the country. But most highways were built as planned.
There's a good image to stop at right away. I know that's not that much yet, but just look at this one interchange. Look at this trench here for the freeway. That's a lot of land that's being taken up. You could have another, the width of another city block in that space, where you could have more housing, more businesses, more urban life if you weren't giving it up to the cars. So again, who are cities for? Are they for the cars and the people who live outside it, or are they primarily for the people that already live there, or who want to live there but can't because of a scarcity of land to build housing on?
Sooner or later, the collective mind is going to put this together, and there's going to be a collective political will, and then it is going to change, and they are going to say, we are not going to fund this foolishness anymore, because it's very foolish.
This is, of course, sped up footage.
The motor car shapes and forms, mutilates and deforms might be better words.
We are exchanging the meaningful and varied life of the city for an increasingly monotonous life on wheels.
The choice is clear and urgent. Does the city exist for people or for motor cars?
And that's very true. And Louis Mumford is a very well-known urban planner. I think I might be getting them mixed up, but I want to say that Lewis Mumford, his solution was to have it's the solution that a lot of the there's this movement called City Beautiful, as well as the Garden City movement. They were very similar, and their solution for too many cars taking up too much space was to have basically towers in the park. So you have vast, dense buildings, and then parkland all around. And it doesn't usually end up working the way that they want it to. Their idea is that people will have this kind of almost pastoral life every time they leave their big tower. But because there's not usually something to walk to that's within walking distance that's worth seeing or doing, it usually just turns into areas that are not well lit, not very safe, places that are pretty battering to the human spirit, really, because they're missing some key ingredients to urban life when they do things this way. There needs to be more than just residential and then you go somewhere else for the rest of your life. There needs to be more happening in your neighborhood for it to be a lively and vibrant place. Let's look up Lewis Mumford real quick here and see what his bio tells us. Okay. So he was influenced by the Scottish theorist Sir Patrick Geddes, and worked closely in association with his associate, the British sociologist Victor Branford, contemporary Frank Lloyd Wright, and some other people who I don't know as well. Ideas. Here we go. Oh, hold on. Let's get back there. So his book, The Condition of Man, published in 1944, he characterized his orientation towards the study of humanity as organic humanism. This is all from his Wikipedia, by the way. The term is an important one because it sets limits to human possibilities, limits that are aligned with the nature of the human body. This is not so much relevant yet. Let's get to his ideas about this city. Well, I'm gonna put I'll put up his bio, and you can look at it at your leisure. Go put that in the comments for you. So here is Lewis Mumford. Hey John, how you doing tonight? We are continuing on with our look at how the mass transit systems across the country. I think you were there for the last stream, so we're just doing part 2 of Taken for a Ride. And here's the work of Lewis Mumford, in case anyone is interested in that. You can take a look at it. Let's continue on in the video, though.
By the mid-60s, the answer was motor cars.
Yep, so there you have
Public
it.
transit continued its downward spiral. As ridership fell, routes were dropped, property and assets sold off.
And again, this was all deliberate. The
Finally,
car companies that
local
own this
governments
wanted
bought
that
what
to
was
happen.
left. They were 15 years too late. For better or for worse, the great American love affair was in full bloom.
Oh, and that idea that there's this great American love affair for the car, completely astroturfed. Has never been an organic thing. It is just been this propaganda promoted by Hollywood in collaboration with these car companies to sell more products, basically. So they make it look glamorous to own this stuff. It's basically just another form of fashion. But it has nothing. It doesn't come from the people themselves. There's no great yearning for cars. People loved mass transit systems. They loved it being part of their urban life.
The beautiful shape for 1965.
Oh God.
One thing you notice about car commercials, The car is always in a field or by a lake or on an open road with no other car for miles around. It's never caught in a traffic jam.
Yep. Yeah, see, it's always marketed as the freedom choice. And yet, you spend a lot of your time in it if you're commuting, stuck in traffic, which you wouldn't in mass transit.
Dirty air hung over the city this 4th of July week. It's particularly difficult for the very old and the young.
They seem to only be able to stay outside like maybe 10 minutes at a time. And then they'd have to come inside and rest.
To meet federal pollution standards,
And that's a good question, John. Why did the public trust just give up and allow this to happen? I think in a certain way, or in certain circumstances, they were definitely, they bought into this propaganda, this idea that the car was the inevitable wave of the future, that it was going to happen one way or another, and they're just propping up an old and outdated system in trying to hold on to public transportation. And because a lot of it was very piecemeal, they would sell what once was a public managed public and traffic jams. I hate them too. It's just the biggest waste of time. But the way that this program of dismantling mass transit systems rolled out, it was not all at once. You would have private companies. They talked about this particular bus line, and they would buy up the local mass transit system in a city who was looking to alleviate part of their budget, and as often is the case, they only see the short-term gains of getting something off their balance sheet as a city, and they assume, because they buy into the notion of capitalism and its efficiency, that a private entity is going to run it better if they can run it for a profit. But what we see instead is that they only do the most profitable lines. Of course, they're not going to do lines just for the health of the citizenry, because their aim is to make a return of investment for their shareholders and the people that invest in them. So they're going to start pruning lines that are not as well attended or used. Lines that run in the middle of the night, where you may only have one or two people on an entire bus. Now, for those one or two people, that could be the difference between being able to have a job, or being able to, get to some urgent appointment, or just be able to get around, and not. It could be the deciding factor, having those lines running, for someone who is out on the town for the night, and drinks too much to be able to drive home. That may be their only option, is that late night bus line or whatever sort of transit line. But if it's not regular enough fares coming in, then they're just going to get rid of it as a for-profit system. So it happened very piecemeal, and it just crept across the country. One after another, these cities would hand over their mass transit to private entities who ran them into the ground on purpose. And yeah, I don't know why there wasn't more of a fight and why people didn't see it was happening. People raised alarms, and of course those people were smeared in the papers. It was all the same sort of conservative tactics you see now. They would smear their character. They would allude to things like communism and that sort of thing. If they wanted to keep mass transit, they would say they're anti-capitalist and anti-progress, all this sort of stuff. I guess people just bought it enough that they gave in. It's difficult to pin it down to any major cause or another. So John says capitalism is very selective. How it addresses capitalism is a very selective address of what gets promoted to help the society. Absolutely. And does not address the needs of society in a complete function. Of course not. Yeah, that's perfect. That's absolutely true. If it doesn't help the bottom line, it doesn't get done if it's not being forced by government. Just like before there was environmental regulations, every company would just dump stuff straight into whatever waterway was close by, because that's always going to be the cheapest option. Cheapest option is always going to be spread out the damage among all the people and keep that profit privatized in the hands of the company. So it's not necessarily anything sinister or shadowy or anything like that. It's just business, right? And doing just business often leads to environmental disaster or a harm to society in one way or another. Same thing happened with our healthcare system. By handing that over to private interests, you have a big business of employing, thousands, perhaps millions of people that work in these insurance companies and work in other parts of the private for-profit healthcare system that would go away. All those jobs would go away if we were to just make everything a universal healthcare system. And I heard recently that was one of the things that made Barack Obama balk at the notion of a public option, because he would then be responsible for the destruction of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or even millions of U.S. jobs, because all those insurance collection agencies would be rendered superfluous and redundant. If you can just walk into whatever hospital you feel like and get care without worrying about it being in network or out of network, you don't have to worry about who to bill or whatever. That cuts a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy out of it. It literally is more efficient, despite it being a public-run system, to do it that way. And yet, at the same time, it would, in fact, put a lot of people out of work, doing, literally nothing good right now for the world. Just ticking boxes and denying people coverage who really need it, and that sort of thing. So you say, yes, critical thinkers are always the minority. Yep, that's true. And, that's not a slight on people in general. People in general are so busy managing their own lives and trying to keep things together that it's really hard to, put your head up and actually have to learn about these things that really do affect your life. But at the same time, they take a lot of time and energy to understand. And at that point, you may not have the political power to even do anything about it. So it's pretty understandable that these things people just kind of let go by the wayside. It's unfortunate, and it's yet another product of our capitalist system that demands 40-hour work weeks as the standard, no matter how much you do or do not need to work. A friend of mine recently was talking about how at her own job, or her old job, I should say, the one that she finally just got fed up with, she would get her work done for the week in, the first day of the week. And the rest of the time she would have to justify, by making busy work and all this sort of thing, her efforts in order for people not to get mad at her and say, hey, why aren't you working? But that's just because that's what that particular job demanded. And she was good at it. She was very fast at it. And so she would get it done early. So that's the sort of structure we have, though, of capitalism. That you are selling your time more so than anything else. You're saying that for these hours, my boss can do whatever they want with my labor, within legal limits, of course. But anything pertaining to the running of the company, they're allowed to do, no matter if it needs to be done or not. So, if you ever worked in food service and you happen to be really good at it, you've probably had some dumbass manager come back and yell at you if you've gotten your work done too fast. And you scream, oh, if you got time to lean, you got time to clean. That's the big phrase in food service. And while that may be true, that just means that workers are going to find ways to spread out their efforts, or at least make themselves appear busy, and get the same amount of work done overall. So much for capitalist efficiency. So Natalie says, and the dollar could actually be used for healthcare. That's too much to ask for, it appears. Yeah. Yep. 12-hour workdays disengage people from their world. Oh, absolutely. Even an 8-hour workday. I think they've done studies, and just productivity peaks after something like 4 to 6 hours. And after that point, you don't get a whole lot more effort out of people, no matter what it is they're doing. It could be an office job, and you're just mentally taxed at that point, or it could be a physical job, and you're just physically slowing down at that point in the day. So it's all just for show, this imaginary productivity. A 5-hour day, I'd be totally fine with that, John. And I think people would get basically the same amount of stuff done in 5 hours that they do in an 8-hour day. Almost certainly. You'd have less time. You'd have to, break for recharging. Yeah, you just get your work done and go home and enjoy the rest of your time. Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on in the video, though.
Environmental Protection Agency said today that it might be necessary to remove 8 out of every 10 cars from Southern California's highways during the worst smog months.
And you wonder why the EPA was gutted since its inception, really. It's because of saying stuff like that, threaten the industry, threaten capitalism in order to protect public health and safety. And you can imagine that all the lobbyists are going to turn their attention towards doing away with your ability to keep on regulating.
I don't know what it's like to not have a car.
You got to have it. It's a necessity of life. There's not enough public transportation to get you around.
By a vote of 215...
And sadly, that's still true today, even in major cities. The area that I live, I'm within the limits of St. Paul. I'm by some major avenues, as pretty much anywhere in the city is. And yet, mass transit's not very reliable where I'm at. In order for me just to get to work, which is not that far away from my house, it's maybe like 5 miles. But in order for me to get to work by transit, I would have to go first downtown, which is complete opposite direction of where I live, and then back up to my my place of work. It's ridiculous. I can get home, not too much problem. I've done that before. That's more or less straightforward. But just to get to work, it's this convoluted system, because that's just how much diminished the mass transit system has been in one of the biggest cities in for 500 miles in any direction. I think you have to go to, say, Milwaukee, or I would imagine maybe someplace in Nebraska would be even comparable size. And yet, our transit system's just atrocious. And it gets better little by little. We almost have a complete triangular loop of light rail within Minneapolis, St. Paul. But it seems to average about a decade to get each of these lines built. So it's going to be a while before we even have any semblance of a system that is really worth commenting on. At that rate, anyway.
To 190, the House today rejected a proposal that would allow cities to spend their share of the Highway Trust Fund on buses, subways, and trains instead of on highways.
The House, defying reason, voted to block funds for mass transit, which we all need, and pour billions more into highways that only the highway lobby wants.
How about that? Our politicians working for us.
In 1974, with public discontent growing, the Senate Antitrust Committee held hearings about the roots of the transportation crisis. Brad Snell, then only 25, was hired to organize the sessions.
And I think the automobile industry is the #1 example of monopoly power that has changed, literally changed the quality of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And it has done so, not on the basis of what people really needed, but rather on the basis of serving corporate interests.
Capital interests, not just corporate interests.
Streetcar system in America?
The answer has got to be yes, because General Motors actually formed a company to go in to buy out these...
General Motors came into a situation where streetcars were inordinately inefficient. They were not flexible. Do you know of any streetcar system that could service San Francisco with all of its outlying communities and suburbs?
I am not an anti-automobile nut. I don't want to outlaw the automobile. I'm not suggesting it isn't a convenient way of traveling. I am suggesting that it must be supplemented by rapid transit systems. And I cannot accept the argument that rapid transit systems broke down because of their complete inefficiency to serve the public, because the experience of Western Europe and Japan belies that argument. And finally, Senator, I must say, with great deference, that if it is true that the streetcar companies were breaking down of their own weight, why was it necessary for General Motors to join with Standard Oil and the tire companies to go in and buy the systems and tear up the tracks?
Good question. Yeah. I wonder if that actually was a stun lock there, or if they just edited it that way. That's funny either way. So John says that you tested a 6-hour workday against a 12-hour workday. Well, TYD. That's one acronym. That's a military acronym I don't know off the top of my head. Anyway, in the military, broke things down into tasks to be accomplished. We were able to sleep more and worked more efficiently. And knowing we were not going to be there all day, we did not spread the dread out over the day. And 5 hours was the completion time on average. Totally not surprised. Yeah, I'm sure that could be said for many similar lines of work. You know, anything where you have a bunch of tasks that you have to spread out throughout the day. Even office work. I'm sure you would find the same thing. Absolutely. But yeah, thank you for sharing that, John.
Have been widely publicized to the damage of General Motors. Street railways failed for economic and demographic reasons.
Sure they
had
did.
Nothing to do with any plot.
Uh-huh.
The fact that GM provided a modest amount of financial assistance to National City Lines did not have any effect on National City Lines' decision to convert from streetcars to buses.
The fact remains that here was a breakdown of a system, a mode of transportation, and in came the bus. Now, you can't get away from buses, can you?
I'm not trying to get away from buses. Let me emphasize again
I thought you were trying to eliminate General Motors and
all I want is balance, Senator. And you ought not to treat the automobile with $15 billion of favor a year and treat everything else like an orphan child. What's good for General Motors is not necessarily good for the country. And in the field of transportation, what has been good for General Motors has in fact been very, very bad for the country.
Absolutely true. Oh, here we go. Some more music. I'm going to have to talk over it to avoid any sort of copyright strike. So here we go.
For a time after the Senate hearings in '74, public transportation.
So John says they want to sell their wares of tires and cars and gas. Forget climate change. And believe me, they knew about climate change back then as well. There was those papers released recently that showed that at least the oil companies knew about it since, the 70s at the latest. They knew it was a real thing and man-made. So Standard Oil, being one of those colluders, knew that what they were doing was continuing to contribute. But capitalism is all about that short-term profit, so they didn't care. It's really, that's what it comes down to. It was more profitable to do things otherwise, so they didn't care who they hurt. Now turn up the volume on the video because I feel like it's a bit soft.
Staged a partial comeback.
Let's see if that comes up a little better.
After years of pressure, Congress finally allowed highway trust funds to be used for transit improvements. Several cities canceled highway projects. San Francisco and Washington put the money into new subways. In many cities,
and there's nothing wrong with having a mix of levels of transit. You can have these sorts of commuter rails that go out into the suburbs, and that's primarily what this system here that they're showing, the BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, that's primarily what it's for. And that's totally fine. That's totally a fine way to do things. Again, you want to make sure that it's more of a network rather than just a line or two here and there. You want it to be as accessible to as many pockets of population as possible. And at some point here, I'm gonna do a video of my own where I'm gonna kind of try and synthesize a lot of these ideas into what I would envision for a mass transit system in my own home area around the Twin Cities Metro. And we're going to incorporate permaculture principles into that as well, such as designing from the pattern to the details. Now, what are the patterns that you should be considering for mass transit? Well, I mean, one pattern would be where people move now. where the concentrations of population and jobs and any other place that people like to go to are, and the concentrations of traffic. And we can just look at car traffic to figure that out as well. So we can use those details to inform us about where transit should go and at what level it should be at. Should it be a local service? Should it be a commuter service? Something in between? Should it be a regional service or even a interstate service? We can use patterns and pattern recognition to figure these sorts of things out. There's a lot of talk, even still in new urbanist communities, about using transit to spur development. It's called transit-oriented development. The idea being that if you put in a transit line, that shows the local business community and local housing construction community that you're serious about wanting to invest in a particular place. And so the idea is that they will build new developments, they will build more commercial space, all centered around these new transit stops. And to a certain extent that does happen, but there's a big question about whether or not it's just guiding development along these lines or whether it's actually spurring on development that wouldn't have otherwise happened. And I tend to believe in the former, that it's just, there's going to be a certain amount of development every year, and by doing these sort of transit-oriented development projects, you're just guiding where you want the development to go, which can be a useful thing, but overall, it's probably better to flip that on its head and do development-oriented transit. Figure out where people are and where they want to go right now, and set up your lines to service that. That seems to be a much more easy thing to wrap your head around as being a good way to do things. It makes a lot more sense to me, because you're not having to really change any of the patterns that are already occurring. You're instead servicing them in a way where, if people are already going to and from certain areas, you're actually now giving them a choice if you put in a good transit line. Whereas putting a transit line out into a space where people don't really go right now, you're just hoping that, build it and they will come is going to take place. There's a lot more faith involved in doing it that way. But that's for a future episode. I don't have all my stuff together right now tonight to do that in depth of a video, but look forward to that. Probably it's going to be a Sunday stream as well when I do that. So John is bringing up Svante Arrhenius, 1859 to 1927, a Swedish, Svante, I'm guessing then. I was reading it more of a Greek way, but maybe it is a Greek name anyway. I don't know. Swedish scientist that was first to claim in 1896 that fossil fuel combustion may eventually result in enhanced global warming. Yeah, so the scientific community knew way before anyone else, but it appears as though the fossil fuel industry at least woke up to that inevitability, as late as the 1970s. It probably was a lot sooner, but just from what has been revealed through internal documents in these companies, they knew what was happening, at least as late as the 1970s. Or at least as early as the 1970s, I should say, if not earlier. So you also say, John, larger public nodes can be linked to smaller nodes with smaller re-engineered vans. Absolutely. Yeah, and there's other ways to facilitate what's called that last mile of travel. It doesn't have to be just straight door to door, but you can go to nodes. And if you look at a highway grid system right now, there's already natural spaces where these nodes interconnect. It's where highways intersect. You can do the same for where major intersections are. You can think of those as nodes. And you can try and link up as many of those nodes as possible in as straightforward a way as possible as well. Because, so this is a bit into the weeds, but when you're planning a bus line, a lot of times what happens is there's a certain special interest. Like you say, you have a large senior housing complex that's a block or two off of the main street. And they'll say, oh, you're putting in a new line here. Can you have it swing by our place so that we can service our seniors? Fair enough. Let's do that. It's easy enough to have a bus turn a corner and then come back to the main road. But you have enough of these interests, and then eventually the route is just completely unintuitive to any way that a normal person would move about a city. You're taking odd right angle turns. You're coming back on yourself instead of just going straight from place to place. So what seems like a benefit to the flexibility of buses ends up being something that makes it just even that much more of a convoluted and unfriendly system. And I can tell you, as someone who likes mass transit a lot and who uses it when I need to, I still find it a very unwelcoming, unintuitive system to try and navigate, especially by bus. Because you walk up to any random bus stop, at least this is the case in the Twin Cities Metro here, it might say what lines go by there, but it says nothing about where those lines go. There's usually no map. You have to do all of this stuff on your phone to even plan a trip. You have to put in your whole destination, and it'll tell you a series of buses and walking that needs to occur for you to make your connections and all this stuff. It's just a really hard to use system, especially for someone that's not accustomed to it. And they don't give change on the buses, so if you only have a $5 bill, maybe you're just overpaying for your fare, and that's all there is to it. They don't give you change. I don't know why. It doesn't seem like it'd be that hard to have that as a convenience. And then there's other aspects of it too that just make it unfriendly, especially for someone who's not accustomed to it. Imagine someone coming in from out of town and trying to get used to a new transit system in the town that they're visiting. If you're in America, that's going to be a difficult task. You're probably going to, changes about delay time for sure. However, I'm going to go back on this side tangent for a second. Change is about delay time, but if they really cared about delay time for getting on and off the bus, they would have a fare collection spot at every bus stop. They would have something where you could put the change into a little machine. It could be no bigger than like what you use for parking meters. We have those systems for parking meters all across Minneapolis, St. Paul. No reason you couldn't have a fare box at every single bus stop. They could also have a map, even an interactive touchscreen map. And any sort of shelter. Most of the bus stops in the metro area are completely unsheltered. You're lucky to get a bench, basically. But yeah, you'd pay your fare ahead of time, so you wouldn't even have to bother the driver at all with whether or not you paid your fare. Charge a monthly pass fee. They do that too, but they make that incredibly difficult to figure out as well, because there's all these different options. It's like, do you want to have an express monthly card? And then you have to figure out, am I going to be within the express time slot more often, or am I going to be in the standard fare time slot more often? And they're like, you can add extra money onto your card, and then it will take off automatically if you have a standard monthly pass, and then you happen to take an express bus, and it'll just automatically. But it just gets more and more complicated the further you go down. And when you realize how little amount, or what small of a percentage of operating expenses is even covered by the fares, it gets to be like, why don't they just have a standard flat rate fare for all times of the day and night? Or probably do away with fares altogether. You want to get the most people onto the bus, make it free. Allow people to just get on and off that bus. Don't worry about transit, or don't worry about fare collections. Don't worry about hiring transit police in order to, kick off people that don't have a ticket. Get rid of turnstiles and cordoned off areas at stops. Do away with all of that stuff. Just make it free. You'd save so much money in litigation, trying to impose fines on people that break the rules. You'd save money for the people that are traveling, which they may then have to, more than likely they're going to use to get lunch on their lunch break if they're a commuter, or for something else. But and then you factor in the amount of wear and tear that you're saving on your roads. All of these savings start adding up as you just get more and more people onto the transit lines. Yeah, we do have proximity cards as well. You put your card up to it. It's got one of those little RFID chips. That's what I've gone to, because that I don't even have to worry about what's happening. As long as I know I have stored fare on it, I just do it. So I just load it up. But it's not the most cost-effective way to do it, though. The most cost-effective would be a monthly pass. But I never know when I'm going to need the bus. It kind of depends. My wife and I share a car. Kind of depends on what her schedule is and if she's going to be able to pick me up after work. If I get off work early, I do landscaping, so time variable can be quite a bit. So that's all I do. It's called a go-to card. Just press it up there, beep. It shows you how much it's taken out. It does transfers automatically. It's definitely the way to do it. So Seize the Mini says it's generally inefficient and difficult by design. Exactly, and that's definitely what we've been talking about throughout this entire video. Got to punish the poor and make systems like this seem unviable. Sure, yeah, make it seem unfriendly, make it seem like if you make one wrong turn, you get on the 62 instead of the 62B, and you're going to end up on the complete opposite side of town before you realize it, and then have no idea how to get back. Yeah. It's because you're right. It's because these systems are seen as for the poor, and in capitalism, the sometimes the overt, but sometimes more often than not, kind of the unsaid, the implicit way of thinking about the poor people is that they deserve their lot in life, and because they are just too lazy, they need to be motivated to do better. So if you give them a shitty mass transit system, they're going to have an incentive to make enough money so they can buy a car and participate in capitalism more. All these sorts of things. It's complete bunk. It does not come out in reality. It's because capitalism allows people to exploit other people. That's the reason that people are poor and remain poor. It's simple and it's true. And so Natalie says the time delay can be exhausting. Thus, people will do anything to have a car. Absolutely. And this is especially the case with buses if they don't have their own dedicated right-of-way. So they don't have a special sectioned off lane in the road, either at the same grade as the road, at the same level, or higher. Or I suppose you could do underground buses. No reason you couldn't. I've never seen it before, but no reason you couldn't do that. Yeah. But when they have to fight traffic with every other car, especially during rush hour, that can mean huge delays. It can mean you miss your bus, and it can mean you're late to work, and you may end up getting reprimanded, and if enough times it happens, you may end up getting fired. And then because the bus is likely not going to come often enough that if you miss one, you can just catch the next one in 5 minutes or whatever, and no big deal, because the system is usually timed out to at least 15-minute, they're called headways, that's the span of time between buses. Because of that means that, miss a bus and perhaps be late. And there's no responsibility taken by the mass transit authority if a bus is early or if it doesn't come or if it breaks down or whatever. You don't get any sort of refund or discount or anything if the bus service completely breaks down. So you're taking a risk every time you take the bus. That's for sure. All right. Well, I think that's it for the comments for right now. Let's move on in the program.
Cities began developing plans for light rail, the modern term for streetcars.
So they had to rebrand it as light rail. They couldn't just call it streetcars anymore, because light rail, at least you can pretend it's the wave of the future, and
Jack Bors is now a transit engineer.
Which is not. It's just a heavier version of
the new systems.
Streetcar that has about the same capacity.
When I worked down here as a student, there were trolley tracks right there on Howard Street, and I would sometimes use that particular line. It's one place that I do remember the old trolleys, and now the new ones here.
Did you ever think when they tore out the light rail that it would ever come back?
I felt in the larger cities like Baltimore and some others that there was a good possibility at some time some of the lines would come back. I wasn't sure I would live to see it, but it happened.
25 cities are now experimenting with light rail systems. They cost less than highways, pollute less, and bring new life to city centers. But the auto and highway lobby has different ideas about what America needs.
And again, just pointing out, this was made in '96, so this was kind of the resurgence of the mass transit line as a good, clean, safe alternative to cars, especially for within the urban core of a particular city. So this has continued on through the past couple decades. It sounds like it was at even a higher pace then than it is now, because now you'll get a line every once in a while, depending on what city you're in. But it's nowhere near the level virtually anywhere. I mean, aside from places like New York, San Francisco, perhaps Chicago, I don't know how good of a system the L really is in terms of really moving people around. I'm just not as familiar with it. But you have to go to really major cities, except for LA, which is just it's just embraced its car culture completely. But yeah, you have to go to like San Francisco, New York, to a lesser extent Boston, DC, to get any sort of any semblance of a real good system. But in any of those places, there's still a big learning curve to use and really take full advantage of the mass transit system. You have to know what you're doing ahead of time. Otherwise, you can get way out of the way in not that long of a time, in a very quick time. I remember I was out visiting my uncle one time. I was probably 15, and he lived in the DC area. So we would take the DC light rail sometimes, and I couldn't figure out the fare pay system. In that system, hopefully they've changed it by now, but at least when I used it, you would have to prepay based on how many stops you were going. So you're going 3 stops down the line, it would cost a certain price, and 4 stops would be a little bit more, like that sort of thing. I couldn't figure, I didn't understand that because no one told me that. And so I just put enough money until it spit out a ticket. And then we took the light rail, me and my cousins took the light rail, more stops than that paid for, and I couldn't figure out why it wouldn't let me out of the station until they had to have some guy come out from his little, fare monitoring booth and say, "Oh, well, you don't have enough fare on this card. You have to put more." But huge learning curve, and for what? Just so things are a little bit more, pay as you go. It seems rather silly to have all of that in place just for, some small degree of fairness to be instilled in the system. So mass transit is safer, and you have delays with cars also. Absolutely. And that really has to be one of the biggest selling points if you're trying to push any sort of improvement to your local mass transit system. It has to be, it's not a car, and it doesn't, if done right, like you have to have, like you see on the screen right now, these dedicated right-of-ways where it's a transit-only lane that cars can't go on. Because there's never going to be a traffic jam of streetcars or light rails or whatever. That doesn't happen because you're planning things out ahead of time. You're never running so many at the same time that they bunch up. So if you're doing it well and you're doing it that way, you can have much more predictable schedules of these systems. There's not going to be that, ahead of time, behind time sort of thing that you experience with buses a lot, because you're not fighting with cars for moving through a given space. And it's definitely much safer. Absolutely. Especially in this day and age, I know I worked Uber and Lyft for a number of years. So I was out on the road. I would do 100 miles a day in the metro here. Sometimes 150. That would not be unusual. And every time I drove, every time I got on the highway, virtually every light that I stopped at, I would notice people that were texting. I still notice it now, even though I don't drive nearly as much. And I'm sure you all can probably corroborate that in your own locality. There's a lot of people that text. And they think they're good enough drivers to switch back and forth really quick, but they might as well be drunk. The amount of weaving that they do, the people that they end up cutting off, the number of accidents that happen because of just that one thing. And it's become so prevalent that I don't think there's any amount of traffic enforcement that's ever going to really cut that down. But of course you don't have that problem with mass transit. You can text and ride mass transit all you like. You could set up a little office. You could have your laptop right there, if you so choose. Or you could just relax and entertain yourself or whatever. But it doesn't matter because you're not the one doing the driving. So yeah, orders of magnitude more safe than driving a car. If we want to reduce greenhouse gases in mass transportation is a must-do. That's a clever phrase. I like that, John. That's a good way of putting it. And yeah, and improve local air quality as well. That's another just a quality of life thing. And if we improve local air quality, what else goes down? That would be healthcare costs due to, lung injuries that happen from polluted air. So the healthcare costs go down. These things have multiplying effects. You have people walking more if there's more mass transit, because chances are you're not going to go, like I say, door to door. You might have to walk a block or two. And that block or two may be a block or two more than you're walking on average right now. I know if I was doing an office job, that would be the case. I tend to not walk too many places. Just the way that it works out for me. Natalie says texting while driving should be against the law. And it is. It has been against the law in Minnesota since, I want to say at least 5 years now, if not longer. It's been against the law. They can pull you over if they see you texting and driving, and yet people still do it. And like I say, virtually every major intersection I come to, there's at least one person who is texting and driving, and it's noticeable. Even before you see them, face to face, you can tell that they're not paying attention. It's such an epidemic. So you're in Illinois. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. I think it's such an epidemic problem at this point that there's no amount of traffic enforcement that's really going to cut it down. You'd have a cop on every block, and they would spend every morning just pulling people over. But what happens then? See, this is kind of a tangential issue. But what I've noticed when I had a long commute, because I used to commute 45 minutes out to my job, and what I noticed was that during commute hours, there were very few traffic cops out on the roads. You might see one on the whole commute, which is strange. There's going to be more people doing more dangerous maneuvers during rush hour. So why would they not be enforcing that at that time of the day or night? And it seems really odd, doesn't it? Much more traffic enforcement during bar close, which that makes sense. But you'd think with more cars on the road, you'd want to have more regulation of people breaking the law. Because I'd see it all the time. Not just the texting and driving, but people just being super aggressive because they're stressed out and in traffic. And then I think what the conclusion that I've come to is that because we have a capitalist system of government, or a capitalist influenced or forward system of government, the police are there to protect capital and capitalists. And who is the people that are on the road more often than not during rush hour? It's people that either are capitalists themselves, that have the capital and own and run businesses, or the people that work for them. So if they got too heavy-handed with pulling people over at that time of the day or evening, people would start, a backlash against the police. And when it comes down to it, it's not their job to really regulate or rein in capitalism. So they kind of just let things go during those times. And you'll see people speeding at those times too, and very rarely are they getting pulled over. So that's my conclusion. That's just it's just a hypothesis. I don't have any solid data to back it up, but that would be my assumption. Let's see. So, John, you've had near misses with texters and drivers so frequently that you know how to look for them. I do too. You can spot them. You can see when you go around a curve on the highway, and you see it takes just that extra fraction of a second to react to that turning motion. Or they just have a lot of trouble. They look like drunk drivers, but you're like, it's the middle of the day. How are you already drunk? And they're like, oh, of course, you're texting. Yeah. So Seize the Mini says it's illegal in Virginia as well, and has been for a while. Not directly related, but a cop in Henrico, Virginia, got a medal for killing a person who had a phone on them when he got pulled over, and the cop thought that it was a gun and shot and killed that person with the phone. Yeah, that happens, not infrequently. Cops are taught to get home safe every day. That's the number one job. So they're hyper vigilant to look for any signs of threats and to act on it oftentimes before they've really assessed the situation. So it ends up that you kill a lot of people that don't deserve to be killed. Absolutely the case. They're not there to serve and protect. In fact, I don't think there's any police station in the country that still has that as their motto. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Yeah. Oh, that's a good point too, John, that oftentimes traffic enforcement is a revenue collection system. That's true. That's very true. And another reason that they can pull you over as well. They can just think that you were texting and driving and have that as a pretext to pull you over. Yeah, and the reactions are programmed responses. Yeah, and it's like, see the gun before you actually shoot. And oftentimes their brain gets there to like, oh, it's a gun, before their rational cognitive part of their mind catches up, and they shoot first and assess the situation well after the fact. Very true. All right, let's move on in the video here.
America is one of the few countries in the world whose people
The
have always
fifth
been
freedom
free to come and go as
from
they
the
please.
National Highway Users
Now that
Federation.
freedom is being threatened. But what can frustrated
Threatened.
drivers do about it? Launch a program.
The highway lobby may have lost some of its 1950s luster, but it's still powerful.
Absolutely.
It has recently
always
pushed through
jobs.
Congress a plan for a second national highway system.
Gotta keep those
with
jobs.
4 times the miles of the interstates.
In long range, launch a program.
Very true.
And in the
There to
cities,
protect
where
property,
people
not
just
life.
won't allow another lane to be added, the highway lobby has developed a new approach.
Yeah, and that's because it has never been shown. There's never been a case where adding more lanes, unless perhaps maybe you just have a single lane, and having 2 lanes allows people to get around slow-moving traffic. Sure, maybe in that case you can have higher capacities, but anything beyond that point never adds or never reduces traffic at all. It just doesn't. People still have to, because there's always the bottlenecks on the on and off ramps. People are still only going to a very small number of places. So in those places, that's where the traffic jams occur, because it just takes one dumb person to not pay good enough attention and make a dangerous maneuver, and then everything just they slam on the brakes, everything behind that cascades, and pretty soon the whole highway is slammed on its brakes. That's all it takes. And you don't get around that by adding more lanes. You just don't. People are still going to the same places. It's hard to even draw an analogy to what that's like, but there's never been any demonstrable change in traffic congestion due to widening of roads. It's never helped. Never helped.
In 1989, the Highway Users Federation formed the Intelligent Vehicle Highway Society. Its idea? Automate cars and highways.
Oh, God.
Computers would control chains of cars traveling 60 miles per hour, bumper to bumper.
Look at that. Look at how long they've been talking about this utterly ridiculous idea. This idea that automated cars are going to save our traffic systems. This is 96. I'm going to remind you one more time. This is 1996, when this is the wave of the future. It won't be that long before computer programs can line up cars so they're virtually bumper to bumper, and then we can have more traffic heading at a better and safer pace, and we can all brake as a big block, and it does not get rid of the major problems of traffic. That is, a limited number of places that people are going to, and the need to store the vehicle once you're done using it. Those two things are still there even if we have automated cars. So that just doesn't go away because you automate things. It may be that if you had automated, Lyft and Uber, perhaps, that you could come up with some sort of a system where, perhaps maybe you have like a vertical parking garage, right? Because we're talking about robot cars at this point. So anytime they don't have a fare lined up, they would be sent into an elevator or some sort of carousel or something, and you might be able to save a little bit of space in parking that way, at great expense and great energy use, mind you. But at least you would get the cars off the road in a way that perhaps wouldn't take up more space. But if instead you had a system where, like now, where empty cars are just traveling around the city waiting to get a fare, just because now it's an Uber driver piloting it versus a car piloting itself, again, you're just adding to the congestion for no benefit, really. It outweighs the benefit of not having to have extra parking spaces. So all this techno, whiz-bang stuff to make cars more accommodating of space, it's never going to be enough. It just could not be enough. So John says, what I laugh at is the light change frequency is accelerated in areas of high traffic, which worsens backing up traffic due to the lag time increased with yellow light time. Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. You have within a city, you have traffic controls that can certainly back things up, especially during rush hour. They talk often in urban planning about how great it is to have short blocks, because what you give up in space by having more intersections and stuff, you make up for in having more usability of those spaces and more traffic avenues. So they're like, oh, it's such a great thing to have these short blocks, except for at rush hour. I've been in many downtown rush hours before, especially when I was doing Lyft and Uber. And I can tell you that all it takes is some bad timing of one light and everything behind it shuts down, no matter how frequent that light is. You can't get people out of the city fast enough to actually make that a viable system. Yeah, look at this. Back in 96, they were talking about automating cars, just like now. We haven't ever gotten there. We've gotten some semblance of that with the assisted cruise control with like Tesla, but I mean, look how often that fails as well, because people use it in the ways it's not supposed to be designed. And then apparently there are semi trucks now that can drive themselves from coast to coast, except for within the city limits without a human driver. But still, that's not widespread, and so I mean, they've been predicting the revolutionization or revolution of the auto industry for over 2 decades now, and it hasn't come yet. And I think it's maybe safe to say that it's just never going to get here. That as long as we have cars and then also people on roads, there's just too many variables for a safe system to function. But anyway, I just thought that was funny. Way back in '96 talking about this.
The hope? Double or even triple the number of cars on the road. This cyber system will require hundreds of new technologies.
Jim, this is Sony's new in-vehicle navigation system. It incorporates two different technologies, GPS, which is the global positioning system of satellites, and CD-ROM.
I just cringe at this. Look at how long it takes to load that map. Think of that compared to the GPS on your phone right now, which is virtually instant. You pull it up and there it is. You can see yourself. GPS at that time was horrible. You had to preload maps in '96. I remember this sort of thing. This is when these personal GPS systems were being sold, before it all got put on smartphones. And you would have to preload the maps. They couldn't hold all of the information of Google Maps. And they weren't connected to the internet either. So just the idea of having self-driving cars built in 1996, like, Windows 96 technology, is frightening. It's frightening. I mean, it doesn't even work on today's technology. So the idea that they were thinking that they could do it back then, ludicrous. It's complete magical thinking.
Well, what we have here, Jim, is a TRW, electronically controlled,
yeah, it was very expensive too.
Powered steering unit, or EPS.
The GPS.
The ultimate test of any steering system is during parking. It takes about 2,000 pounds, 1 ton of force to steer and park a car. But watch this.
Ooh, power steering.
The electric-powered steering unit is now generating about 1,000 pounds to lift Mary. Think about this.
Wow.
Next generation
Mary weighs 1,000 pounds?
Systems could become a key component for hands-off steering as part of the automated highway systems of tomorrow.
Dear
C-3PO piloting your car.
But the highway lobby has found powerful allies in the computer and information industry.
Oh, they're just going to keep blowing smoke up our ass to keep selling the next big thing.
Funding for transportation research now goes to intelligent vehicle projects.
I mean, what this did produce was a lot of products that have not yet helped us in the way that they have promised, and gotten a lot of people rich just trying to develop this sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, you're not solving the key problems of traffic, and that's bottlenecks at on and off ramps, and where do you store the vehicles when they're not being used. Yeah, so they want us to text while we drive. Yeah, very true. And texting was not even a thing in '96. Like, it may have been for very few people, but I think that was maybe the first time I even had a cell phone.
Today, he'd love Los Angeles.
It probably was even later than that.
With the old rail lines gone, more people drive cars here than anywhere else in America.
Yeah, how's that working out for
Those
him?
who don't depend on a badly overburdened bus system.
Transportation is an issue, especially in our community. We know that 90% of the ridership on the buses are low-income residents. The job centers get further and further away from where we live, and because the lack of services in our community, we have to go so far to get groceries.
Too many cars are the problem.
The bus pass people by.
Yeah.
It's been many
Automation
times
does
I've
nothing
been
to
at the bus
lower the
stop
amount of
and 2 or
cars
3
or
of the
emissions.
buses pass me
Very
by,
true, John.
that I walk back home and call someone for a ride. It's just not a good system at all.
Mm-hmm.
All over America, public transit is in crisis. Federal operating support, an important piece of every system's budget, has been sliced practically in half.
Look at that, getting off
At
the bus in the middle of traffic.
Highway funding continues
That
to
seems
grow.
safe.
Philadelphia is one city that's been badly hurt.
This proposal is the most comprehensive cutback that we can ever recall being proposed.
I drive 15 miles to the Parksburg train station, and if that station is closed, I'm not driving 30 miles to the next closest train station.
Our backs are to
Transit
the wall.
must
We've
be
had to cut
reliable in
10%
order
out
to
of our
be a
budget,
functional
$65
alternative.
million. We've squeezed in every possible direction, and we're really down to the very last resort. I don't want to do it. I think it's a terrible mistake, and I think we'll pay a dear price later for it.
And so this is part of the problem. He's saying that he's having budgetary issues that are preventing him from funding the system as it should be. There's no reason that transit should or have to make a profit, or even come close to making a profit, or come anywhere near return on investment itself. It should be seen as a service for the people, the way that the Postal Service is a service for the people first and foremost, not a profit-generating center. Think about the Postal Service. You can write any dumb thing you want to on a piece of paper, put it in an envelope, and for the cost of a forever stamp, send it all the way across the country to the middle of the desert, and have a postal person personally deliver it to whoever you're trying to reach. There's absolutely no way that it would cost that much to do that service if it was a for-profit system. Those systems would be eliminated. If we ever eliminated the Postal Service, a lot of people just aren't going to get mail anymore. Or they're going to have to drive, 10, 20 miles into the nearest center of town and rent out like a P.O. box, only a private P.O. box, in order to get mail. Because it's just not profitable to do a lot of these routes, especially the rural routes. There's a lot of miles you have to travel to do that. But the thing is, it's the Postal Service. It's the idea that communication, person to person within this country, is a vital thing that everyone has to have access to. And though we subsidize it somewhat through paying postage, its goal is not to make money. Its goal is to connect one person to another, so that you have the ability to, say, petition your government for a redress of grievances. So transit is no different. You shouldn't see transportation as any different than any other service provided to people. Its first goal should not be making money or even coming close to making money. Its first goal should be moving as many people as possible to where they need to go. And that's it. That should be goal number one. Because so many benefits come from that one ability to do that sort of thing. From the ability to move about as you please, you have access to more jobs, you have access to more places to spend your money. You have more interaction between people face to face. People's mental health gets better if they have more mobility. These are all benefits that compile on top of each other, one after another, if you make it more of a service, so that your main goal is just moving people throughout their daily lives. You eliminate things like food deserts if people can get to other places that can serve their needs without too much hassle or too steep of a learning curve to use the system, or really even any money. Just giving people access to the stuff they need and want in their daily life is immeasurable compared to just profiting off that system. That goal should be way, way down there. Yeah, so John says, like insurance, we balance out the hard circumstances. I guess that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah. But even if you're going to have a fare, the way we do our fare systems in this country is completely ass backwards. Because when are the highest fares? It's when the most people are wanting to use the system. The idea being, all these people, they're going to finance the lower used routes and times. But that's absolutely backwards. Your goal should be getting as many people onto the system as possible, and make that attractive to as many people as possible, so that you save things like road construction and traffic jams and all of the costs that are associated with that, all the pollution that comes with that, all these other benefits that come from getting people out of their cars. So rush hour should be, if anything, the lowest cost time to have people taking mass transit, because there's the most benefit from attracting as many people as possible onto that mode of transit. And John also says the internet needs to become public transportation also. You know, I'm coming around to that sort of an idea that communication is a basic human right, and therefore it needs to be, I mean, definitely the internet needs to be regulated a lot more than it is currently, because a lot of bad things happen. You know, people plan crimes that really hurt people on the internet, virtually out in the open. People harass and cause other people to do terrible things to themselves over the internet. There needs to be, I mean, I could see it being regulated as though it is the public square. It's just the new public square of our modern times. So I can definitely see an argument for that sort of thing. And then at the same time, access to the internet. If we gave everyone access to the internet, regardless of where they lived, their lives would be better in ways that you can't just quantify on a spreadsheet. It would give them all sorts of opportunities that you can't just quantify and compare to what the cost would be. Communication, yeah, should be a basic human right. And modern communication, for better or worse, centers around the internet. So Natalie says 2021 new cars are up in price and used are also, and with loan interest rates rise, then maybe more will be using mass transit. And it's kind of funny you mentioned that. It's to the point where car dealerships, their main product is not the car themselves. Not at all. Not by a long shot. They make most of their money through financing, through setting up these deals with banks to lend the money to the customer that they then pay over the course of you know, however many years they sign up for. So that's their main focus of, or their main way of generating revenue. It's through financing. So they should be looked at. They should be looked at as finance dealerships, more so than car dealerships. But yeah, I mean, there could be a tipping point where car travel gets too expensive, and we did experience that during the economic downturn of 2008, when a lot of people just couldn't drive anymore at that point after they had lost their jobs. I wouldn't be surprised if COVID has done a similar thing. And we actually saw a reduction in gas prices due to that sort of thing, because the demand was just so far down, because so fewer people were on the road. It actually changed the projections. Until that point, car travel had been rising year over year until we got to the 2008 crisis. And then I would assume again that same sort of thing happened over this course of COVID so far. And again, if you don't have a meaningful alternative to a car, then it may just be that other things in your life get shunted aside. You don't get to go out to eat or have entertainment or spend your money other ways, just so you can keep up whatever car you have and keep it on the road. Because you can't just, especially if you live in like the suburbs or something, you can't just one day say, I'm not going to do cars anymore, and then have it be, oh, well, here's a completely acceptable alternative. You have to have the infrastructure in place in order to take advantage of it. You could be really extreme and just decide you're going to be a bike person now. I knew a guy who lived way out in like the outer ring suburbs of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and he biked everywhere. He didn't care. Winter, with snow or ice or whatever, summertime, on the highway, whatever. He just biked, and he got through it because he was that dedicated. But I don't think it's fair to expect most people to be that dedicated and to take their life in their own hands that way, because let's be honest, there's not even alternative biking infrastructure in a lot of these places either, to the point where you would have a safe trip wherever it is you want to go. People do it, but they often are the outliers, not the rule. And John says, our lives are improved. Before that, he says, we don't need rent, toll roads, keepers, or masters to profit from our direct exchange over public exchange routes. Well said. Yeah. I mean, toll roads in a big way are no better than any other rent seeker. They're not really providing anything except access, which they have themselves made scarce through buying up of public thoroughfares, basically. They don't really provide anything for that money. And they're oftentimes, I think more often than not even profitable. They still have to be subsidized by the government to keep up with repairs. And then they just slow down traffic at the same time. Like there's no really upside to toll roads at all. Don't let anyone fool you with that. And you say our lives are improved when others' lives are improved. I agree with that, John. Very true. Yeah. Natalie says, never finance through a car dealer. Yeah, if you can help it, try not to do that. And I do it myself when I don't have access to enough capital otherwise to get a car. Luckily, I've downsized. I've gotten rid of my own car, and my wife and I have been able to make it work with just one. But there are definitely times where it's difficult, even still, even living in a city, like I said. And Natalie also says there's car dealers that won't even take cash. Yeah, because that's what they're not there to actually sell you the car. They're there they make their buck on the financing. And John says microsystem, the person collapse is related to the macro system collapse. Absolutely. Yeah, very much. People are products of their environment and their own circumstances that they have usually gotten into through no action of their own, usually born into, or just luck their way into by being at the right place at the right time. Yeah, I would definitely say they're predatory. That's a good way to look at it, the auto financing institutions, because it's something people need, and you kind of are at their mercy with whatever rate they'll give you.
One of the many cuts the city has had to make, 4 trolley lines have been terminated. Philly has worked hard to hold on to the streetcars left by National City, but now the ghosts of General Motors and the Fitzgeralds may finally have their way.
The shop will be closed. The plug is pulled, and it's only a matter of 2 more weeks, and we'll be out of business. And then they give us 2 weeks to actually get rid of everything and shut the place down. 2091 was brought in today for an inspection.
You're doing the inspection?
Oh yeah. As far as I'm concerned, we're running streetcars until the 12th of September. And my job is to maintain those streetcars in a safe manner until the 12th of September. And on the 11th of September, I'll be inspecting streetcars.
Good for you, man.
Well, they're saying that in 3 years they're going to put back on the track these cars.
Well, if you believe that, then you believe Chrysler's going to bring back the DeSoto. And I don't think they are.
So yeah, that's pretty sad. And it's just people don't have the right view of it. They need to view this as, like I keep saying, a public service, first and foremost, getting people around. It's not just, something to be commoditized like any other thing in people's lives. We have such a fetish with commoditization in the U.S. It's really sick that we allow it to happen for people's basic necessities. Shouldn't happen for food, for housing, for healthcare, any of this stuff.
Death. You cut back service, you lose passengers, you lose revenue, you lose the confidence of your ridership that you can be effective and meet their needs. This is happening all over the country.
It's a
Over
spiraling
half of
effect.
the transit operators needing to either raise fares, cut service, or do both.
I would like to give people a choice. I'd like them to be able to have their automobiles. I'd like them to also be able to have a meaningful choice in the use of transit. And
that's the right
they
answer.
don't have that choice right now.
That's the right answer.
The only good transportation you can have in cities, in modern cities, is the one that combines public transportation, private transportation, which treats pedestrians decently and uses often bicycles and has a diversity of modes.
That's a good point too, Natalie. The whole credit rating system is a form of oppression that tries to enslave one to capitalism at an early age. Yeah, absolutely true. Combined with the student loan system in order to keep the unruly college students in line and push them towards getting employment for the rest of their life to pay off their loans. Yeah, these are all meant to trap people. That's for damn sure. And it's pretty insidious, the way that it doesn't give you the option to even live a simpler life, free from the predatory nature of all these lending systems. You basically got to be part of it in one way or another. John says, our public relations have been reduced to how I can exploit you. Yeah, that is very much the sad truth. Yeah, how can I make another dime off of something that you have taken for free in the past? Yep. Very, very true.
When everybody drives, the system collapses.
When cities get to the point where you have nothing but stop and crawl traffic, obviously there isn't going to be urban delight. There isn't going to be delight of the things that make a city what it is.
Right.
And therefore mass transit has to be continued, improved, and expanded.
Yeah, and for those of you watching who maybe are forced to commute just because there's no meaningful alternative, what would you do if you got that time back in your life? How would you spend it? And there's no wrong answer to that. It could be socializing with people you meet on the bus or the train, assuming you're still going to go to the same places. It could be that you would have it almost certainly is going to be have a much shorter commute because you're not dealing with fighting traffic. So the further you are out, the more time is going to be shaved off by taking mass transit. You could spend that time at home or out socializing and taking in entertainment. You could just take the time to nap more often. Who knows? There's endless possibilities to how you could spend that time. And I don't think there's anyone who thinks that sitting in traffic is a good use of time whatsoever. But I keep saying it, but it really needs to be repeated. There has to be a meaningful alternative for people to get people out of their cars. And if there is a meaningful alternative, it's been shown time and time again that people will. The Green Line in St. Paul, Minneapolis goes from downtown St. Paul to downtown Minneapolis, and then out to the edge of downtown, the sports stadium there, the Twins Stadium. That line has exceeded all expectations of ridership from the first year on. I have never passed that line day or night that wasn't at least a good third full. It could be the middle of the night. There's still people riding that light rail line. People want to ride transit if you give them a good option to do so. It's part of urban life because it takes so much of that stress of driving away. Driving in a city can be quite stressful. You're always taking your life in your own hands because you never know what sort of other drivers you're going to come in contact with or what obstacles are going to pop up that you don't see until it's too late. None of that is true with transit. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. You can just sit back and relax, and all you got to do is make sure you get off at the right stop and make sure you're on the right line in the first place. But there are definitely ways to make that easier and more accessible too. And that's another point we'll talk about after this video, how to make transit just better in general, how to make it more attractive, how to sell it in a way that people will want to use it.
It's vital to the health of the city. It's vital to the beauty of the city. It's vital to the quality of life the city has.
We're here really in the first step of a long-term campaign to bring mass transit and public transit to the public.
We've had quite a few demonstrations at the Board of Supervisors. In fact, one of the meetings had more than 1,000 people at it. You know, if nobody's talking, if nobody's saying anything, then people may think, oh, well, it's something that will blow over. It's something we can't change. But if people begin to think about it, people begin to talk about it, then they think they can change it. And that's where we make a difference, I think.
This is a critical moment. I would say in the next 5 years, these 5 years will determine whether there will be viable transit systems in over half of the areas of this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's definitely not wrong about that. So Seize the Minis says more parenting and game development and communism sort of things would happen. I'm assuming they're responding to what they would do with more time. Absolutely true. Yeah, I would do a bunch of that stuff. I'd probably live stream more if I had more time. Well, my commute's not very long right now, but still, could be even more, time that I would get back if I had a good, even just a bus line that went up the way I needed it to go. In the morning, not just at night. John says we may wake up at a park having enjoyed the day. Yeah, there you go. So many ways to spend your time if it's not being, in a certain sense, enslaved to the capitalist paradigm of private transportation and all of the ills that it breeds. John says, I was commuting at the age of 13 because of public transportation. There's another point. The city can start opening up for children at a much younger age. 13. I don't know what the law is in your country, but here you have to be 15 to even have a driver's permit. But there's no reason kids can't use public transit to get to the places they need to go. As long as it's made safe and easy enough that even an 8-year-old could get on and operate well. Why not? Takes a lot of the burden off of parents having to shuttle kids around as well, especially if they have to work several jobs just to make ends meet. So yeah, it opens up all sorts of possibilities for people that right now don't have any. As I mentioned earlier, not just children, but people, adults with disabilities that prevent them from being able to drive. Open up their world immensely. Just immensely. Right now in the Metro, we have a system called Metro Mobility. It's kind of an on-call sort of door-to-door service where there's like this mini bus that comes by, and it's from everything I can tell, it's a really bad and unreliable system. They give you a window of like 3 hours or something where they may show up. And the same is true when you call them to take you home. So you have to have a lot of extra time on your hands to get where you need to go. And for some people, that's really their only viable option, other than perhaps relying on others to drive them around. And that's not always going to be available to everybody. So yeah. Transit offers hope and expansion to the worlds of many people that don't have it now. I mean, imagine being a low vision or even a blind person and trying to navigate your way across town in a busy city. Obviously, driving your own car is going to be out of the question. Taking an Uber or Lyft or a taxi is going to be expensive. Taking any of these assisted vehicles is going to be relatively expensive, and like I say, you have to really have a lot of give in terms of when you arrive at your destination and want to be picked up as well. Imagine if instead we had a good system that any person with low vision or no sight could use no matter where they lived. That had enough signage that was at the appropriate places where they could just read the braille and figure out where they needed to go. Perhaps even auditory cues throughout to help guide them where they need to go and just help them live more independently. What a wonderful service that would be. And that's just one example. Same could be true for people that require wheelchairs to get around. Right now, that's a difficult prospect. You have to have a vehicle that can accommodate that if you're going to drive yourself. You have to have all kinds of modifications to drive your own vehicle if you don't have the use of your legs. And that's extra expense and extra time to get in and out of that vehicle as well. Again, you may have a service that you can use, but things like Lyft and Uber, for the most part, are going to be out of your realm of possibility. What if we had a system instead where people could just get to a transit stop? There was ramps at every transit stop. They can get up to the level of the bus or the rail line and wheel themselves right on. Same grade at the level of the transit stop as it is getting on and off of that transit. Could open up huge possibilities for their mobility. So yeah. All right, let's move on. Okay, so we're seeing the bad prospects for the future from a 1996 perspective, and I gotta say they were not wrong in assuming that the prospects would be dim for mass transit. So they're ending on a pretty low note. Low note, that is. So yeah, I'm just gonna pause it here so we don't get any more DMCA warnings. I've had to mute parts of past streams just because of that, because they like to use copyrighted music. I wish less productions would, but hey, made in '96. YouTube is certainly not a thing for another 10 years, so they certainly weren't thinking about that. All right, let's look at some options now for making transit better. What do you guys feel like? Do you want to look at some ideas to make transit more efficient and accessible to people that are of various levels of ability? Do you want to look at some kind of funny, kind of out there ideas for mass transit? Where should we go from here? Because there's a number of things that we can do. So it's kind of up to you guys what you want to look at. So Natalie says a good, safe, efficient system could make a world of difference in many lives and life stages. Absolutely true. And remember, both sounds good. Thanks for helping me decide to use the minis. But remember too, no matter how able-bodied you are right now, if you live long enough, you're almost certainly going to come into a mobility issue, whether it's your sight declining, whether it's your mental faculties declining, whether it's your mobility itself, your ability to walk around. You're going to come into it declining if you live long enough. It's just part of the aging process. So at some point, you're probably going to have to consider alternative means than driving yourself wherever you go. Wouldn't it be great if you could stay in your same community too? Not have to move somewhere that caters specifically to senior living, quote unquote. I know I'd feel good about that. I would like seniors to be able just as integrated into every community as everyone else is. Not have to be, cordoned off in special care facilities because of all these extra needs. And reducing the barriers to mobility everywhere is one way to at least help with that. John says the masses are led by propaganda related to commercialized car cells, resulting in the destruction of the public transportation system. People are very much indoctrinated, and everyone likes to think that I'm not susceptible to propaganda. I'm not susceptible to commercials and advertising, all this stuff. Everyone is. Everybody is. I am susceptible to suggestion through commercials. It's not something that you can just say that I don't believe in that and I'm not going to be influenced by it. There's a reason that advertising is a multi-billion-dollar industry. There's a reason that political campaigns pour countless billions every year into political advertising. It's because it works. Overall, it works. So yeah, you sell the idea that people that Americans have a love affair with the car, and which came out first in a movie that was put on, I believe, by Walt Disney, because he loved cars and wanted to. He probably had vested monetary interest in selling more of them as well. That more than anything is the reason that cars are king on especially city streets, is because we've been fed that idea that there's no alternative. All right, I'm gonna put it myself into full screen mode. I'm gonna look for something else. I'm gonna see if I can find this one transit system, which has some good ideas, but the way they execute them, at least in this simulation, is not so great. So let's see if I can even find what I'm looking for. Oh, that's not the right even search box. Nope. Okay, I'm gonna get out of full screen mode for that one there. Let me just search for it real quick, see if I can find it. Here's one of them. We're gonna watch this one. This one's cool. So here's an idea for transit of the future, and I'm gonna let it run all the way through. See if you can spot what some of the possible pitfalls of this particular system are, what some of the drawbacks may be. It's not that long. It's only a 5-minute video, so I'll just let it play. And as long as there's no music, I'll just kind of shut up for a second here. So here we're looking at so already there's music. I'm gonna have to talk over it as well then. Here we go. Look at that. So what we have here is a wider mass transit system than your average streetcar or light rail. And instead of having an elevated guideway, it's on stilts, and they have all this complicated system of moving back and forth. I'm just going to mute it because it doesn't actually add anything to have the music playing. But look at that. Look, it's just moving through this traffic that's moving smoothly itself. No problems there. Up and above the cars. It's hard to even keep a straight face. I'm sorry. But look at this. Here, it's going around a roundabout. That's another interesting idea that you don't see a lot with mass transit. Putting it around roundabouts, so they can easily move from one direction to another. Take a right-hand turn. Oh, and here's my favorite part. It kneels. It kneels to go down underneath an overpass. Yeah, maybe once we get self-driving cars, maybe at that point this thing could be viable. But can you imagine driving underneath that sort of thing, and all of a sudden you come to an overpass and it kneels on top of your car? That's incredible. But there are some good ideas here. I don't want to completely make fun of it. We'll get to that in a second. Oh, here's another good part. It's come to a stalled car on the rail, and it just one after another lifts its feet up basically, and steps over it and on its way. Oh, another stalled car. Just lift your feet up, go over that car, and everyone's just going about their day like nothing unusual is happening. Yeah. So imagine that too, that this thing just steps over you because you're an impediment. That's some good reactions. Yeah, so they're just showing it from another angle in case you couldn't figure out what's happening. So all these stilts. Yeah, we've seen it. They're just padding out their video, basically. Let's see if we even get to it. No, it's just going to keep doing that. Let's get to another part. So okay, so here's kind of an interesting part too. Look at these transit stations. I think is what we're looking at here. That it's envisioning these kind of wide, flat transit cars coming up to. That's kind of cool. So you're boarding right at grade. That's good. Good for people with wheelchairs. Good for just regular pedestrian flow. That's all very good. Those are good things. No one's going to get horrifically murdered through AI-led buses. I would say this is cool. So we have, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Let me put that back there. We have, I'll back it up just a couple seconds there. We have these roundabouts, so you could easily have a line move from one direction to another. So it's going north-south, and traffic flow tends to go east-west. You just go around this roundabout. Don't have to have all these complicated track switchings. You have this entire development that's centered around these transit stops. That's not a bad thing either. That's kind of a good idea. But, yeah. It does look really cool. So yeah, get ready for me to throw a bunch of cold water on this idea. But there, like I say, there are some bits and pieces we can take out for sure that are good. That this thing really does address. But overall, there's definitely some drawbacks to this sort of a system. All right. I think that's probably the basics of this idea. Yeah, that's it. So, who can spot... I'll just leave it on that image. Who can spot some of the ideas that maybe are lacking and not very realistic when it comes to mass transit? This would definitely be one of them. The idea that you're going to have a giant 3-lane, or is it 4-lane wide transit car kneel down, and they, you know, I've seen some other videos of this particular development company. They say, oh, we got 10 cameras underneath it, so we can monitor for any traffic. We have the warning lights flashing on each end of it so that you know to get out of the way because it's about to come kneel down. But still, there's so much room for just squashing a car from above that this is a bad application. I would have to say that's not good at all. Not a good way to do things. And there's no reason. Instead of developing your mass transit system to accommodate other infrastructure, why not accommodate your infrastructure to accommodate your mass transit system? Or have the tracks go up above that overpass rather than below it. You know, wouldn't that be a little easier? So, of course, the other thing, yeah, and that also traps you until the traffic clears as well. There's no place you can go if you're stuck behind it. But so the other thing is these stilts that this thing is on. They show it in the beginning here. Just zipping in and out of traffic. All it would take is the car to merge at an inopportune time. And already, we've talked about how distracted drivers are. Think of someone just texting and driving and not even thinking about it, trying to merge lanes. Oh, they got a clear space. Here comes a mass transit car leg right in your way, and now you've taken out one of the 6 supports of a mass transit car full of a lot of people. It doesn't show it in this video. Let's see if I can find another one. Ooh, that's kind of a cool one too. I'm not finding the one I'm looking for, but this company has put out other videos where they talk about how many people are accommodated by this car, and it's quite a few. It's probably like a capacity of 100 or more people per car. That's a good idea. There's no reason that mass transit has to be limited to your standard streetcar or light rail car size. It could be several lanes wide, especially if it's not at the same grade as traffic. And that's the other good idea here. Having your mass transit above the traffic frees it from all the congestion. Now, of course, with the stilts, you're not actually freed from traffic. Even if you can step over impediments and stuff like that, it's never going to be a safe mode of transit, really. It's more or less wishful thinking. And the idea behind having the stilts rather than building the infrastructure for an elevated railway is that at grade rail is always much cheaper. It's always a lot cheaper to not have to build bridges, basically, or viaducts. You're basically having a transit viaduct, or putting it below ground in a subway. Those are always more expensive than building things at grade. And this way, you don't sacrifice any of the car lanes for the mass transit. It just is not realistic in its application because of those stilts. So this still kind of falls to the false notions of capitalism, that necessities need to be commodified. So it's trying to save money to justify, having a bigger, flashier mass transit system. Our thinking needs to be different than that. We need to say, yes, let's invest the money and the infrastructure into reducing the amount of cars on the road. And so how you would do this sort of a system better is just to have an elevated guideway. No stilts, no having to slow down for stalled cars, just have it run across above all the traffic. That's one of the good ideas. So you have the roundabouts and at these intersections, you have all this building infrastructure that's sprung up around, presumably where you would change lines to go to a different transit line. That's a cool idea as well. It's just the way that they've applied it is not great. But I just thought I'd show you that. That's a fun one. There's another version of that, very similar in idea, but the way it would be applied is a lot better. So here we have basically a glorified hoverboard that is being, I don't know if it's being pushed along that track. Oh, it is being pushed. So it's being pushed from behind along that monorail. So, and you can tell that's a really large piece of infrastructure. That's a really large, what do you call it? Mass transit car. I don't even know how you would term that. But instead of having to have super wide tracks to accommodate such a big thing, it more or less hovers over the ground and just touches down when you get to a station. That's kind of cool. Of course, you have to be really careful about those fans never breaking, those propulsion systems never breaking down, because that would be a huge disaster if you did. But this is basically an idea for commuter rail. It's a different kind of commuter rail that again uses less track. And this, you don't have any of the problems of the last system we looked at, where you're going to have interactions with cars and mass transit. But look at all the people that it accommodates. You can have, an in-car bar. Like this is hundreds of people that is talking about moving. Something that's not really possible with the mass transit systems of today. But again, there's no reason that we couldn't take this sort of an idea and apply it to, say, major highways. You have a highway that's 5 lanes wide. I mean, this is even bigger than that could accommodate. But you have a highway that's many lanes wide. No reason you couldn't have your mass transit that wide as well, as long as it's going above and not interacting with the cars. So that's kind of cool. Let's see what else we got in the idea of future mass transit. This is one that I liked for a long time. This is called personal rapid transit. I'm pretty sure that's what we're going to look at. Let's see what the time is. Oh, we still got about 45 minutes tonight. Not too bad. Yeah, it is intimidating to look through these mega mass transit systems, but I think this is definitely the sort of dreaming that we need. The idea of moving even more people. I think that's really the next step, is supersizing the carrying capacity for mass transit, looking beyond the 1 lane wide streetcars or light rails to taking up some more of that 3-dimensional space, the space above roads. And the cool thing about putting it above roads is you then have the opportunity to put a canopy above that of like solar panels or wind turbines, like small size wind turbines. And then you could, because especially with highways, they tend to be cleared on either side of trees. You get some good light shining onto the highways. Why not put a solar array above that? And then they could even fold down if, say, it was really snowing or something like that. Solar cells aren't going to be working while it's snowing that much anyway. Fold them down flat so that they catch all the snow, and then blow the snow off the sides, keeping it off of the highway below. You could save even more money. You wouldn't have to salt the streets nearly as much, wouldn't have to plow nearly as much, and hence there would be much less wear and tear on your roads. So you're saving the streets at the same time as you're generating a portion of the power for the transit system. Sounds like a cool idea to me. But that's the sort of thing that can happen if we get beyond this, transit has to conform to our current notions of what roads are idea and fit within that small envelope. But anyway, this one here is a little bit different. I'm pretty sure. Oh, this is going to do a top 10, so it's not just going to be personal rapid transit. I'll turn on the sound, see what we got here. This is the top 10 transit ideas. Some of these are going to be good, I'm sure, and some are going to be pretty fanciful and far-fetched. So it's not. We'll just go ahead and mute it again. So we just saw the the stilt-driven mass transit system. Like I say, look at, they got solar panels on top of that system too. But you can make it even better by having a whole solar canopy rather than just on top of the cars themselves. Yeah, there's no way it's going to kneel down and that be a safe thing. But being above traffic and being wider, those are two really good ideas. So I think this is the other one that we just saw recently. Oh no, that's not. But yeah, you could carry a whole lot of people in those cars. It'd basically be tripling the capacity of your current light rail sort of a system. Ooh, and that to me, having all of that mass balancing on two skinny little legs. I understand why they want to do it that way, to make the track less costly, but no, it's not going to work. You get enough of a wind shear, and it seems like the whole thing would go toppling. I think you need at least two legs to accommodate that. And this, you can't have that. No. You're not going to have that going that close to people. All it takes is someone not paying attention, and they're dead. Their life would be over. Yeah. So a bit silly as well, but that's okay. We're considering all possibilities at this point. Transportation based on rugged individualism has failed us. Yeah, absolutely true. Humanity's greatest strength is in our ability to cooperate and help each other out and combine ideas and strategies for not just survival, but for thriving. And rugged individualism doesn't help any of that. Oh, so yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. That's how that's going to go down. I'm sorry, but I don't buy it. So now we're looking at basically the blimp assisted rail one, or rail assisted blimp, I guess I should say. So elevated bus. Let's see what we got here. Is there actually sound with this? Nope, just music. It looks more or less the same as the last one. 1,400 passengers. So look at the huge boost in capacity you have. That part's good. The idea of carrying 1,400 people on a single line, that's amazing. That's way over capacity that we have now with light rail systems. Just by taking up more of that width rather than just the one lane. And see, oh my God, they're actually testing this in real life. Okay, so you have any sort of a pickup truck or box truck or anything, and you get squashed by that. That's way too low. I don't know. That seems like a huge short-sightedness, a huge case of short-sightedness to me. Yeah, 2.1 meters. You have to severely limit the types of motorized traffic you could have in your city. That seems like, why would you do that? Why don't you just make it high enough so that semis could go underneath it? Makes no sense to me. The physics of steel won't allow many of these concepts. Yeah, I assume those, like, the toothpick legs supporting the entire weight of transit as it goes along a single line. That probably is not going to be something that can be accommodated. You're going to at least have to have on each end of it stilts, if at all. Oh, yeah. So the idea that if something goes wrong, you're just going to stop all of traffic and people are going to slide out onto an embankment, a highway embankment. I don't know about that one. Oh, yes. Here we go. So this is getting more into like personal rapid transit. And it never, it looks cool and futuristic to hang it from a line rather than having it sitting on top of a line. But you have to reinforce the walls of the vehicle to be able to take the stress of hanging down. There's no actual advantage to hanging rather than putting it on top, letting it sit on top of the rail. And there's also some other disadvantages in terms of like track switching. You have to switch, the entire track has to move to go to a different track rather than just like you do with a train, just switching parts of the rail. You can't do that while it's hanging. It just, the physics of it don't work. Yeah, I think they actually built this. I think it was Austria or something. They used it in the movie Fahrenheit 451 as like a future transit system. It was something just like this anyway, but it was hanging down. Oh, so you say Sasagoi on one of the last ones. Maybe if it straddled the whole roadway and just avoided any overpasses, that the stilts would work. Yeah. So you'd have to elevate the entire thing, so it was never coming into contact with cars at all. I don't know what the obsession. I think it's just because it looks futuristic. That's why they hang it from the rail. But like I said, there's absolutely no advantage to it. Let's see. Maybe we'll get beyond this one. I think we got the gist of this sort of thing. So if this is kind of it's not quite personal rapid transit because you're not calling an individual car. It's more like it's like a hybrid between a bus and an individual car for shipping as well. There's some ideas to be mined for automated shipping along railways. That is something that could definitely be done much more easily than along roadways. Again, that's way too low. All it would take is a semi and you're toast. Yeah. I'm going to move beyond this one. Let's take a look at the next one. Yeah, we got more of that. Let's see what we got here. So this has been in service since 2022. Well, okay. I guess that's wishful thinking. Not seeing the difference yet. Looks basically just like a subway car. Okay. So just a cushier version of a subway car. And that's a good idea. Having the doors that open kind of like an elevator does. Let me just back that up there for a second. Oh. Let's see here. So there you go. So it's more like an elevator where you have the static doors that stay at the station opening at the same time as the doors that go into the car. That would make things a lot more safe. You don't just have the sheer drop off that you see at a lot of subway platforms where, people do die falling onto the tracks. This would eliminate that. So that's cool. Yeah, John says the ground shifts and it fails for a lot of those ones that they were looking at. Oh, God, the Hyperloop. The dumbest of ideas so far. Vacuum speeds for over 1,000, what do you say, miles per hour or kilometers per hour? Doesn't matter. because it's individual, they to operate these safely, it wouldn't be any time advantage to taking a plane. So you're not having all that many people in each car versus a plane, which can take, hundreds of people depending on how big it is. Hyperloop, just not a great idea. You think the Atlanta airport has a setup kind of like that with the double doors? Oh, that's a great idea. I don't know why they don't do that more often. It just makes sense from a safety point of view. Why do you want people to be able to get down on the tracks anyway? Like, there's no advantage to it. Hyperloop, you have to keep this entire tube. I don't want to hear anything Elon Musk has to say because he's a liar. But the idea with the Hyperloop, you have to keep this entire tube virtually a vacuum for it to keep working. Which means if there's any sort of a leak all the way along it, and all of a sudden your 1,000-mile-per-hour little container is hitting a mass of air, it's going to be like you're coming into Earth's atmosphere. like you've seen a shuttle coming into Earth's atmosphere and basically fire is coming up around it. It would be that same sort of thing if there was a leak anywhere in this vacuum tube. Extremely dangerous and takes a lot of maintenance, constant maintenance and vigilance to keep that running safely. And when you think about, 1,000 miles per hour versus, I think the fastest bullet trains are like 250 miles per hour without all of that extra apparatus and infrastructure, is it really all that much better? Probably not. Probably not. It definitely is going to cost a lot more to build and maintain, especially since you have much lower passenger capacity. This looks like a variation of the Hyperloop. So you have basically a turbine engine within this system. Yeah, and if the vacuum, think about that too. If the cabin of your little car in the Hyperloop leaked, you could be suffocating by the time you get to your stop. But there are practical ways to adapt a lot of these ideas. And that's the value of looking at these sorts of futuristic sorts of ideas. Oh, people are really being idealized into liquid blob men and women. Yeah, nothing wrong. I must have been tripping on something strong. Whoever thought that up, Natalie says. I think you're right. Like, I get you. You'd be like, future. How do we show it's the future? It's like, let's make them liquid crystalline people. This looks like just basically an automated car-ish sort of a thing. You can link it up together. Oh, of course, Dubai is trying this out. Now, this sort of a thing I think actually has legs for the future. Basically, a human drone. I wouldn't be surprised if that's where automated vehicles come, or the direction automated vehicles go in the future. Because once you get things up and away from people, you have a lot less obstacles to navigate. And, all you have to do is make the technology cheap enough that at least you have a rich clientele that can do it. And I wouldn't be surprised if this sort of drone automated vehicle is the wave of the future. Driven by artificial intelligence. There you go. That seems a little bit more realistic, because you're basically just taking current technology and modifying it to carry people. But you can have, planned flight paths. Drones are, of course, much more stable than even like a helicopter, because they have more ways that they can move, because they have the different the different rotors operating at the same time. So they can stay a lot more stable even in wind shear. That's been shown. So this is something that may actually go somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised, at least for the business elite. So Airbus. Okay, so just an automated taxi. That's not anything all that interesting. It's, again, one of those technologies that's always just a few years off. Never quite gets there. Yeah, transit for the wealthy, definitely with those drone ones, at least to begin with. But yeah, you can imagine like hopping from skyscraper to skyscraper, or downtown metro to your, country home, just through automated routes where they could all, all the different drones could talk to one another and position one another to not get hit. And when you're operating in three-dimensional space, there's a lot more levels you could have. Imagine like the world of The Fifth Element, where people had flying cars, but there was different traffic levels. It could be that same sort of thing, but with drones, with actual technology we can use now. So this is just hyping up, automated travel. I really don't think we're anywhere near this being a viable option. Yeah, come pick me up and have your car come pick you up. There's just too many obstacles and unpredictable things and ways that automation doesn't interact with the world as a human would, that it's very difficult to imagine it actually being a viable, widely used system. Self-driving cars, that is. Yeah, the minibuses are an interesting idea. And definitely if they were going more along a guideway, I could see that being a viable idea. But just along the road surfaces, again, so much goes on that's unpredictable on the road. And you can put, all it takes is something that the computer doesn't recognize as a person. And we've seen this happen again and again. All it takes is something that the computer doesn't recognize as a person, and it plows right into it. Or it doesn't recognize as another vehicle. Plows right into it. There's no, oh, wait, no, don't do that. It happens too fast. This, I could see maybe. If it's going along a fixed route, but still you're dealing with so much, I guess there'd be externalities, you would call it, that unless it was like slow creep, it'd be hard to imagine a delivery vehicle actually operating on the roads like that. I know they've started that with like sidewalk drones, like to deliver pizzas or something. And even those are having lots of issues where they just get stuck and they have to rely on the kindness of strangers to set them right again. But, yeah. If it was going slow enough, then potentially. But whizzing through, dealing with traffic and pedestrians, I gotta say, it just, I don't see this as likely. So I think this is just going an overview of all the stuff we've looked at so far. Yeah, self-driving trucks. They've shown that with highway travel, at least, you can get things pretty well automated with the trucks. You just need it for like the first and last mile. Once you leave your destination in a city, presumably, and get to the city you're going to, you still need a driver for that part, because that's where there's just so many variables. On the highway, it's a lot simpler. You're not dealing with pedestrians for one thing, and all their unpredictability. All right, well, that was kind of a cool one to explore. I hadn't even seen that one before. Maybe we'll get a little bit more. We got about a half hour left. I'd like to look. Okay. We'll look at one more thing, and then we'll get into some more viable ideas for making transit better. Yeah, we'll look at personal rapid transit. This was really popular in the early 2000s. I really got into this idea myself, of personal rapid transit. Let's see if we can find a nice, succinct video on it. Let's see if this is a good one.
Our transportation system is made up of three things: vehicles, pedestrians, and infrastructure. This so-called system
Yeah, screw bikes.
was never systematically developed.
Just kidding. I don't believe that. I'm just saying that's what he's saying.
It just happened. And it didn't work. And it still doesn't work.
Yep.
We cannot
He's got
expect
that
to
right.
fix the whole system just by replacing the human behind the wheel with a computer.
For sure.
Cars are only part of the problem. Driverless cars could make congestion worse over the next 30 years.
If you have a bunch of ghost cars
And
driving
it's
without
not
people
just
in them.
about congestion and safety.
Gotta say, this is really dry
It's
speech,
also
though.
about bad transit.
I'm kind of like, get to the point. I'm sorry.
Pavements that cover half of suburban real estate. Crumbling infrastructure that gets
Well, looks like
worse
the 35W
every
bridge
year.
collapse happened not too far from me.
And it's about jobs. In short, ladies and gentlemen, it's about the very quality of life. When I was chairman of the Airport Consultants Council,
I'm gonna
we
have to.
found all kinds
We're gonna have
of
to up the
improvements
speed on this one.
could be made if we could move
This is
people around airports in small pods.
we're gonna have to go 1.5.
Then we found these pod systems existed. They're called Personal Rapid Transit, PRT.
Personal rapid transit. Here we go.
In 2005, I decided to devote the remainder of my professional career to PRT. We are now working on the next generation of PRT that will have speeds up to 100 kilometers an hour and line capacities up to 20,000 passengers per hour for about 1/4 the cost of rail.
When he says line capacities of 20,000 per hour, that's likely a figure that doesn't really mean a whole lot to you. But to give you an example of comparisons, what would be like a good amount, like a well-moving street, I guess, a street that moves very well with cars. So on a city street, oh, I didn't type all of that right. So yeah, oops, there we go. So per lane per hour, theoretically, the maximum flow rate for cars is between 1,800 and 2,400 vehicles per hour. And that's passing a given point on a highway, so that's even more so than your average city street with lights and pedestrians and all that sort of thing. We're talking about a highway, so per lane mile, a maximum amount of people that you can move per hour per lane is 1,800 to 2,400. So you multiply that by the number of lanes you have. Theoretically, in practice, again, it doesn't work out that way because of the limited amount of exit and on-ramps and the limited amount of places that are people's destinations. But theoretically, you can move that many. So he's talking about 20,000 people per hour, which is a huge increase. And of course, this is, again, his theoretical system. There's only one system I know of in existence that actually has PRT, and that's in Morgantown, West Virginia, something like that. And it's not a very long line, so it's hard to get real world data on this sort of thing. But just keep that in mind. What he's promising would be revolutionary in terms of urban transit. And as you can see here, what personal rapid transit is basically an automated car, but it's on a guideway, and it's above street level, so you're never worrying about interactions with pedestrians. You're never worrying about stoplights or traffic flow, and you have a very limited range of places that each of these cars can go. But the idea is to make an entire grid. In fact, I'll let him. Whoops! I keep hitting a button there. Sorry about that. The idea is to make more of a transportation network rather than just a line, so that these cars can switch tracks very quickly, and you might have a line up and down every street in your downtown instead. So that's what's promised anyway by personal rapid transit. So let's keep on.
PRT systems are in public service around the world. They separate vehicles from pedestrians.
Yeah, when he says they're in operation, it's things like a shuttle between two airport terminals. They have one of those at the Minneapolis airport, or between a campus and a downtown. It's not full systems. So he's kind of fudging the statistics on that, or the data on that, the reality of that at the very least.
Are extremely safe. Passengers ride seated in small driverless vehicles that travel on dedicated guideways. Small vehicles require small infrastructure, which is relatively
I think maybe we go back to 1.5. This is maybe a little bit too fast at this point. 1.25 we'll try.
Unobtrusive and inexpensive. Numerous offline stations located on sidings allow non-stop travel and result in short walking distances. Waiting times are typically less than a minute. However, first-generation PRT is relatively slow, with low to medium capacity. Higher speeds and capacities of the short stations were previously thought impossible. Next generation.
So the idea is you have, instead of centralized stations, you have a distributed system of many more smaller stations. So say you work in a big office building, it's likely to have at least one stop at that office building. And if it's even, if it's a really big building, there perhaps are stops on every side of the building. But you have, you basically just get up to the car, you maybe pay ahead of time and you put in your destination ahead of time, and a car shows up and you go there, or you do all that stuff inside the car. And basically it just maneuvers through a series of track switches, the most efficient route to wherever you're going. And the idea is you don't hassle with traffic and stuff like that, while at the same time being a hell of a lot more safe than street grade, street level self-driving cars. This is stuff that can be done with off-the-shelf technology right now. So I had a lot of hope for this sort of a system once upon a time. I thought it was pretty cool.
PRT solves all three issues. Speeds are up to 100 kilometers an hour, and one guideway has the capacity of about
62 miles per hour is 100 kilometers per hour. So keep that in mind too,
the to get
you
there
Americans.
holds 4 passengers and is battery powered. It runs on rubber tires with top speeds of 40 kilometers an hour.
So 20 miles per hour. Still, if you're talking about gridlock traffic versus this sort of a system, 40 kilometers sounds pretty good. I mean, that's the speed of a bike, easily. That's not so bad, but definitely you could up those speeds without too many issues of safety. Question is always the number of cars that are in operation at the same time before you get slowdown of the entire system. So you do run into some of the same issues that you do with car traffic, because you're not having you can't just plan out the entire system like you can with a fixed rail system where it stops at the same stops every single time, because you have the unknowns of where people are going to want to go versus where they are. You have more chance of things becoming congested, even though that they're being driven automatically and having closer spacing because they can do things automatically. So you do start to run into similar issues to car driving the more people are within the system at the same time.
It has been in public operation since 2010. The line capacity is 2,000 to 3,000 passengers per hour.
Which is comparable to a lane of traffic. That's not bad.
Ultra's Heathrow pod serves Terminal 5
Yeah,
at London's
24
Heathrow International Airport.
miles per hour.
It is also battery powered and rubber tired. It holds 4 to 6 passengers and has similar capacity to the To Get There system, although a next generation system is being developed with much higher speeds and capacities. This system went into public in 2011. This is the station at T5. This is one of the stations in a parking lot. Average waiting time is less than 30 seconds.
Whew, that's pretty good.
The Vector system went into public operation in 2013. It runs on rails and gets its power from the wayside or a third rail. It holds about 9 passengers and top speed is 70 kilometers an hour.
Hey, we're getting even better.
Maximum capacity around 7,000 passengers per hour per direction.
And that's similar to an entire highway
The
system.
Modutram pod holds 6 passengers and is battery powered with rubber tires running on rails. It has top speeds around 60 kilometers an hour and maximum line capacity of 5,000 passengers per hour with the ability to increase this by coupling vehicles together, as seen here. The TubeNet transit system is being developed here in Hangzhou, China. Each vehicle holds 2 passengers. It uses rubber tires and wayside or third rail power. This picture shows how solar panels can be attached to the guideway in a way that shades the vehicles.
Jeez, what is
1
that
meter
button I
wide
keep
solar
hitting?
panels running the
Sorry.
length of the guideway can generate most of the energy needed by the
Hey,
system.
there you go. The exact idea I was talking about. He's not really showing it in this picture, but like he was trying to say, there's a canopy above that rail system. So instead of putting the solar panels on the individual vehicles, you have an entire shade network of solar panels, which keeps you cooler when you're riding the rails if it's the summertime, and as well as provides power and shields the whole system from the elements, basically, wear from precipitation, as well as any streets that are below it. So, hey, a good idea.
Batteries in the vehicles help store energy for nighttime use.
Yeah, and you're very right, John. Without stops, that's fast. If you're not having to stop at every single station, sure, you could maybe even do it faster than any other sort of mass transit system. So Seize the Mini says, also solar panels put in the canopy system is more efficient means of generating solar energy. Yeah, and as I was mentioning before, because you're already elevated above the ground, there's less chance of having obstructions to those solar panels. And if you've ever had your home assessed for solar panels, you know that the main concern of solar panel installers is obstruction. Even so much as a wire going across an array of solar panels can severely limit the amount of capacity that it's generating. Because of the way that solar panels are linked up, it severely limits capacity to have any amount of shadow falling on that solar array. But putting it as a canopy, hey, you have a much, and way high up as a canopy, you have a much greater chance of having open, clear paths to the sun to generate that electricity. I was going to you know what? It's funny you mentioned solar freaking roadways. I was going to show that video as well. I'll save that for a future stream, though, because we're going to be wrapping up here pretty soon. But you say part of why solar freaking roadways was a shit idea is at the end of the day, the panels being flat, it had a lot of other issues too, but that was a big part. Not to mention that, there was so many issues with that idea. So in a brief summary, solar roadways was the idea of having these hexagonal cubes that were topped with glass, the most durable, grippy sort of glass possible that the cars would drive over. And then there was a small solar array within each of the cubes. I guess the cube is not the right. Each of the hexagonal blocks that would generate power for the system, and then an array of LEDs that you could then, so the theory goes, have all sorts of possibilities. You could block off a lane just by changing the light that is being projected up from it. You could alert travelers to congestion ahead. You could, communicate in a variety of ways using these LEDs. But it turns out that, like, as Seize the Minis says, having your solar panel flat, like against the earth, is a very inefficient way of doing it. You almost never see solar panels laying flat to the earth, because you want to have them at a right angle to the sun to have, maximum solar penetration. So another issue then is that you're driving on top of what's generating power. So you're shading that for every car that's on there. Any sort of tree that's over the road, you'd have to get rid of. And just like during peak capacity, like rush hour, a good portion of that road is going to be shaded by cars. It doesn't make sense. Not to mention the glass itself. All it takes is a bit of sand to blow onto the road and then get ground by tire after tire before it's so scratched to hell that it doesn't even function as a solar panel anymore. There was a ton of issues with it, and that's why it never got off the ground. But I will show that video explaining its promise in a future stream, but I'll save it for now. It was an entertaining video at the very least.
Stations can incorporate small businesses below the platform. If necessary, neighborhood stations can have very small footprints.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike trains, stations can be sized to meet demand. Here you see a large station with the through guideways carrying vehicles non-stop above the vehicles stopped in the station. This is a floor plan for a station with 12 berths. Note the storage space for ready vehicles.
That's kind of cool the way they did it there. So as the vehicles are waiting, instead of just having to keep them traveling around the system uselessly, they're actually out of the way so that, you know, car could come along the track and bypass all of the waiting vehicles and keep on going down to the next station if that's its destination. That's kind of cool the way they've set it up there. That makes a lot of practical sense to me. And yeah, like as he said, you can kind of fit it to the projected demand for a certain space. If it was you know, out in a suburban stop where you may only get a few passengers per hour, you could set it up where there's only, you know, 1 or 2 cars waiting, and it's a very small platform that you would need. If it's something like a high capacity office tower that is used quite a lot, or as a sports stadium or something like that, you could have much larger stations. So the idea that it's a lot more scalable than just your basic fixed route trains, that definitely is true. So there's a lot of pluses and potential for this sort of a system. I'm just not convinced entirely that it's better than a fixed route system based on just observing the current traffic patterns and densities in your area and then just routing things accordingly. Like, it sounds really cool to be able to go much closer to front door, but there's a good possibility that it's just cheaper and easier to do just a fixed route system where you have the same set of stops along each line that you've made, and you just plan it along the way that most people usually go anyway. Then you're gonna be servicing, you know, 9 out of 10 customers anyway, without having the added downsides of systems that can become more congested or less congested based on demand at the time, as this system would. So I think perhaps the drawbacks of a car-oriented system would come into play with this system as well, because it's never been done on a scale that can really test its mettle. It's never been done in any sort of large urban area and have a network built out to the point where you could really test, does it work better at rush hour than other forms of transportation? But it's a neat idea, and you know, it'd be cool if someone would at least try it somewhere to see if it really does work at scale. Because all of this is really very theoretical so far. The few systems that have been built that he's been showing are very limited in the number of stops they have and you know, the number of riders they ever could have. It's not super high densities that they're used at so far.
Turnaround guideways at each end allow vehicles to change directions if needed.
Yeah, so
Now we will see
so it has the principle of a roundabout as well. I didn't even notice that. But so I don't know if my cursor shows up, but basically looking at the upper right-hand side, imagine a car coming along and looping around this station, and for whatever reason it had to go back the other way. Instead of continuing along the guideway to the left and off screen, it could take that roundabout loop and change course and direction, head back that way. So that's kind of cool too. That makes it a little bit more versatile.
Information of a 4-bay station showing how it could be organized to encourage ride sharing. We will also see how passengers could choose to pay for a vehicle to themselves and have very short waiting with non-stop travel. Alternatively, they could choose to pay less, wait up to, say, 5 minutes, share a ride, and possibly have to make an intermediate stop or two. This ability to allow passengers to match the level of service they receive to the amount they're willing to pay is relatively unique to PRT. It can help promote social equity.
Yeah. Also help to promote capitalism again, and if you have differences in rates of you know, to travel here or there, there's always the possibility then that less profitable routes would be less serviced, basically. Interesting here. What do we have here? We have passengers select their destination and are assigned a boarding gate before entering the platform. So I like the idea of that because you're eliminating the time between the passenger getting into the vehicle and it leaving. So if you have your destination pre-programmed in and you know which part of the station platform to go to, all of the extra time to program the destination happens before it even comes to you. So you just get in and it takes you where you want to go. Maybe you scan your card again to prove that it's you and no one is stealing your ride. But you know, that's relatively quick way of doing things. So that's a cool idea. Yeah, so it's color coding. It'll say go line up at the green place because that's where your pod is going to come in. And so then they back out and they go back into the flow of traffic. That's cool. I still can't deny it. There's definitely a lot of potential for this sort of a system. It just remains to be seen whether it can be as efficient and as useful as a larger scale system, like some of the ones we saw earlier, if they were just to be operated on an elevated guideway, but have that, 200, 300 person capacity, there's a chance that it would be even more efficient overall than this sort of a system. But as I keep saying, I'd like for it to be seen. I'd like for this to be at least be experimented with, because it'd be cool to know. So I think you're getting the basic idea here of how things are sorted out. You get a color-coded stop based on where your particular pod is going to come to. You wait your turn, and that's where it's going to go. So I think one of the main areas that this does have a lot of potential is actually in the suburbs, where you have a more spread out clientele. So because you can have smaller stations relatively spread out, and because in the suburbs you're not as likely to have any sort of gridlock due to a lot of people. I don't want to miss these statistics. I'm going to pause it there while I say this part. Okay. So in the suburbs, because things are already spread out, you could have potentially much more stops. So like at least every major intersection, and then maybe a few places along there. Not as many as like So our current transit system with the buses out in the suburbs, the way it often goes is along a bus line. There's a bus stop either every block or every other block. And during peak times, what that means is your bus is starting and stopping every few seconds. Like as soon as someone gets off the bus, the bus starts going again, and someone pulls the cord again because they want to get off at the next stop, and then the next block. It slows down the whole operation so much that I've actually walked next to a bus before, and I'm going at the same overall speed. I'll get to the next bus stop by the time it gets there. It super slows down the system. It's meant to be more efficient and more enticing. Get off right at your block, right? But actually there's more efficiency in limiting the number of stops, because there's that stop and start time every time that you're just compounding on itself every single time you stop. And it gets really annoying to ride as well. Like you're just like, oh my God, don't press that stop button or pull that stop cord again. Because I just want to get home, and like every single block I'm having to stop and just, might as well walk at this point. So getting back to the personal rapid transit, you could have more frequent stops than say a light rail or a streetcar and still have it run pretty efficiently. And at the same time provide a larger geographical area service for less cost than any sort of light rail. Even with the elevated guideway and the stations, individual stations themselves, I've seen projections where it costs even less. So I think the real place that this should be tested, more than anything, is in suburbs. You could even have it kind of as feeder routes, as they're known. So you take a large geographic area, think of it kind of like a watershed where all the water drains into a central area. You could have it kind of collecting people from dispersed areas down to a park and ride, where you can then switch modes and take a much larger capacity mass transit car into the heart of the city that you're going to. But yeah, I'd love to see someone try this in the suburbs for sure, because that's one of the difficulties with suburbs, is it's really hard to serve them efficiently, because the population is just so spread out that it's hard to justify running, large capacity cars out into these almost rural scale developments. So yeah, I would love to see this happen in major suburbs. That would be really cool.
Being mostly...
Yeah. Oh, so with the bus, if you miss it at one stop, you can catch it at the next block. That's true. And in fact, even the light rail that is in Minneapolis, the blue line, and I suppose the green line follows the same track too. Once it gets into the heart of downtown, it's literally stopping like every other block, because there's so many major areas to stop at in the heart of downtown Minneapolis that I've seen people miss the train at one station and run at top speed, like you have to be fast, but they can run fast enough to catch it at the next stop. That's literally something that's possible.
elevated, PRT can easily be retrofitted to existing streets without requiring additional right-of-way. It only needs to remove 10 to 20% of traffic for congestion to all but vanish. Stations can serve legacy transit systems, helping boost their ridership. They can be attached to buildings, providing direct access to jobs.
So here, I hadn't even thought of this before too, but here's another situation where personal rapid transit could really shine. There's this style of development that tends to happen in suburbs that become, hubs for business for one reason or another. Like there's the suburb of Bloomington in the metro here. And its main reasons for existing are the Mall of America and the airport, basically. They have a lot of hotel service. They have a lot of business complexes, like these mid to high-rise business buildings, but they're usually surrounded by these huge swaths of parking lots. It's density, but it's not. It suffers from the same problem as towers in the park. You pretty much have to rely on a car to get from one to another. But if you had this sort of a distributed transit system, you could be going from one. You could go from like Mall of America to your hotel. There could be a stop at virtually every hotel, really, and every sort of business park like you're seeing here. And it's spread out enough that you're not as likely to run into transit congestion, even with a system like PRT. So that would definitely be another place where that could be tried out. And since Mall of America is still one of our major tourist attractions for whatever reason, there's international travel to see that every single day. And if you haven't been there, don't go. It's nothing special. It is basically just every sort of retail chain you can think of in one spot. And then a pretty cool theme park in the middle of it. If you do want to go for the theme park, that definitely is a reason to go. Then the aquarium is pretty cool too. Other than that, unless you just really, really love shopping and you want every single store in one place, it's just a bigger mall. But having a system like this, that could be even another thing that kind of dovetails nicely with our tourist attraction nature of that area.
Jobs and businesses. Vehicles could leave the guideway to travel on roads to individual homes.
Oh.
In new developments, homes can be clustered around
Okay.
stations, giving door-to-door.
So, yeah, he's talking about it not only being cars on a guideway, but being able to then leave the guideway and become self-driving cars. I don't think that part's realistic at all, at least not in this stage in AI development. I just don't. That's a bit of wishful thinking. But I mean, certainly it's conceivable that you could have a transit stop. Like if you look at just one of these sections of homes, you could have a transit stop that's kind of in the center of each one of them, and they could be easily accessed by the surrounding blocks. That's a little bit more conceivable than it leaving the track and actually acting as a self-driving car. That's much more of a pipe dream.
Service and mostly eliminating the need for roads. Imagine living and working in a park-like setting, yet being in the midst of a dense city with on-demand, high-speed mobility for you and your entire family. Imagine.
All right, imagine that.
This is not just some vision for the
He's going
far-distant
on.
future.
I thought that was the end of the video.
First-generation systems can solve today's problem, like the Red Line extension in Chicago. 4 stations for $2.3 billion.
This is the sort of thinking, though, that makes me turned off to Person Rapid Transit. When they start talking about justifying costs, who cares if it loses $2.3 billion? And that's not how much it loses even. Wait. Red Line extension in Chicago for stations for $2.3 billion. So, I see. So for only what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stations, it costs $2.3 billion and loses money on the whole line. And his argument is going to be that you can build a very much larger system with many more stops for that same money and supposedly not lose any money in the deal. But that should never be the focus. I'm sorry. If you're going to sell it this way, it's just going to make me less likely to get behind it, because I think you're being too capitalist in your marketing and promotion, which makes me think that perhaps you're selling a bill of goods that you're not going to be able to deliver on the promises you make, because now you have financial incentives to get your particular project built.
This requires massive government subsidies. PRT would have 10 times
that's
as
exactly
many
what he's
stations, 5 times the riders,
arguing.
cost 1/3, and turn a profit.
Yeah, turn a
More
profit.
importantly, it would revitalize
I mean, really, who
this
cares?
entire neighborhood. PRT eliminates congestion and improves safety and mobility. Farebox revenues pay for all capital and operating costs. New PRT systems result in new businesses and jobs without the need for government subsidies. Communities with PRT systems will have thriving economies and happy citizens. PRT is the transportation infrastructure solution of the future that can be implemented today. Even very large cities will be able to move and breathe.
So yeah, that's not a bad argument for what he has overall. I'm not too. And starting over for some reason. I'm not too convinced by some of his claims, especially the cars turning into self-driving cars, leaving the actual elevated guideway and becoming self-driving cars. Not going to happen anytime soon. And the idea of it being profitable, I don't really care. And again, it just turns me off to hear him talking that way, because that's not what my focus is. And it makes me think he's trying to entice people with that little carrot. Oh, and it can be profitable, so that's why you need to buy it. So like, what are you hiding? It just reminds me of like the Simpsons episode where he sells them the monorail because it's going to make their city, shiny and new and put them on the map, and just like Brockway and Ogdenville and all these other stuff. So whether or not that's true, it just gives me a bad taste in my mouth hearing him talk that way. Yeah, and that's a good point too. transportation cannot revitalize a community because transportation only makes the community efficient. It can knit a community together in many ways. That's one more way that got a cord beneath me. That's one more way that personal rapid transit is at a disadvantage to regular mass transit, in that it does not facilitate community interactions the way that any other sort of mass transit does. It's very personal, as the name implies. It's very personal, and it's meant for personal use. It's meant to separate yourself. So still, you're walking from station to where you're going, and from where you're coming from to the station. So there's definitely more possibilities for social interaction and chance meetings and that sort of thing. But as far as actually using the system itself, it's not as bad as cars, for sure. Not as isolating as cars, but still not as community oriented as a train or even a bus. For further community alienation. That's a good way of putting it, John. Thank you. Yeah, and Season Mini says, agreed, profit shouldn't be the goal in infrastructure. I do wonder if we're really going to be able to see significant improvements to things like transit while capitalism continues to exist. That's true. Well, we still view it as something that is to be commodified, for sure. Let me just freeze it on here, we'll put it up on that. A little bit something nicer to look at for you. Yeah, that was a cool video. I hadn't seen. It's been a while since I've checked in with Personal Rapid Transit to see how it's doing. It seems like it has definitely advanced in its thinking a little bit since I last checked up on it. Yeah. So here's another of capitalism that makes mass transit unattractive and unbearable. That's the advertising and the captive advertising. And think of how, it would be bad. It's bad enough to have, billboards plastered all over the inside of buses and rail cars and stuff like that. Think of how much worse it could be in a personal rapid transit system where it knows where you're going and where you're coming from, and it can infer some ideas about what your tastes and shopping are, and think of having tailored ads as you're using mass transit that you have no ability to mute or turn off. You could have screens yelling at you from all different directions. That could be a real nightmare. So, especially when you're talking in capitalistic terms of profitability of something that should be free to all, it's got to make me think that there's perhaps some unforeseen and dark turns ahead if a system like that went through. That's not to say that you have to do personal rapid transit the way this guy is suggesting. You don't have to market it as profitable or anything other than it moves people better and is efficient in certain situations more so than other forms. I think that's a much better way of looking at it. Yeah, it'd be like owning Windows 10. Yeah, that would be awful. Really awful. And I would hope that people would stop using it if that were the case. Be really unfortunate because it seems like it does have a lot of cool potential. All right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground tonight. I didn't quite get all the things out that I wanted to talk to you about transit, but we'll definitely come back to this in a future stream. I think next week, if Dan Platt's not going to join me, I don't know if he's or not yet. Seems to be every 2 or 3 weeks he likes to stop by and talk to me about urbanism. But if that doesn't happen, we'll probably go back to doing some more stuff about permaculture next Sunday. But yeah, this is a fun little diversion about mass transit, one of my passions when it comes to planning for cities and planning for better communities. So yeah, I'm glad we took this journey together and learned a little bit, saw some funny stuff in the realm of future transportation and mass transit options, but maybe came away with some cool ideas and possibilities as well. So thank you all for joining me on this. Before I go, I do want to plug one more thing. one more thing that I would like to show you. Let me just get rid of all the open tabs right there. So on the group that I run, Left Signal Boost, we are having nominations for our annual Lefties Award Show. And we are trying to highlight and celebrate leftist creators from as many different platforms as we can find support for. You know, everything from Reddit to blogs to databases, leftist organizations, literature, journalism, visual arts, podcasting, Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, all the big platforms, social media and otherwise. And we're trying to get nominations for the best from this time last year, and nominations are still open until the end of the month. So they will close Halloween night at 11:59 p.m. just before the next day starts. Let me just get a link here, and that's Central Standard Time, I should mention as well. Copy the link. There we go. All right. So I'm going to pull it up. Actually, yeah. So I'll get that pulled up for you so you can see what it looks like as well. See some of the people that have been nominated already. Pinko the Bear on Twitch. I think he's been nominated. Let's explore that. I'm pretty sure he was nominated for something. I think it was probably variety streamer. Let's go back down to Twitch. So here's Twitch category. Variety channel, we have Feminist Critique, Poly People, Idan Simpson, Class Time, and Pinko the Bear, and Left Flank Vets, who have all been nominated for the best leftist Twitch variety channel of 2021. But if you know of any other people in any category that you'd like to see just get recognized for their work, and it's not like we have any sort of big prize. You get a picture of this statue, basically, and we have people that will put together funny little clip arts of them, accepting the award for award night. We like to have a lot of fun with that. But the main purpose is just to showcase the breadth and depth of leftist creators and their creations across as many platforms as we can manage. And this is a true award show of the people. So, is that picture really an NFT? I just found it on the internet. I have no clue at all actually where it comes from. I just searched for fist holding microphone statue, and that's what came up. That would be really funny if it really was an NFT. It was not intentional if it was. Oh, you're just kidding. You got me though. I wouldn't be surprised though if there's some obscure NFT that has something like that. Oh yeah, we can make our own NFT and have that be the awards. But anyway, this is truly an award show for, of, and by the people. All the nominees are by whoever. Non-fungible token is what an NFT is. Cryptocurrency. Your Dogecoin, your Bitcoin, all that sort of thing. Yeah, I'm glad you liked it, Natalie. Thank you so much for stopping by. So just follow this link here, and you go to the Left Signal Boost group, and you can nominate whoever you want. There's as many categories as is applicable to them. There's no limit. So, like I say, award show for the people, truly for the people. All nominees are members of Left Signal Boost, as well as a couple other groups that we've partnered with. And all the voting is going to be done by everyone who has access to the internet. That's all you need to be able to vote on the lefties. And voting will be starting November 1st, and we're going to have our award show the day after U.S. Thanksgiving. So I'm pretty sure that is the 26th of November. I'm just going to double check just so I don't screw that up. Yep, the 26th of November is a Friday. And we're going to have our award show that night. And if any of the actual winners feel like it, we'll have them on the stream right here And that's where we're going to be streaming the award show, right on this channel, Bread Theory, on wherever you're in this right now. And we'll have some co-hosts on from the other groups that are helping out, and just have a good time of it. And every single person that gets even a nomination on award show night is going to have a little, 5-second clip featuring their work. So if there's any leftist that you're really, enthusiastic about and you want to see them get more attention, there's no better way to do that than to go over to Left Signal Boost, join the group. It's real easy to do. And then cast your nominations for who you'd like to see get recognition for the work they do. And it's not about hierarchies. It's not about putting anyone down for not doing well. We like to celebrate all the work that gets nominated, and it's just about saying thank you and exposing this great work to more and more people. That's the main focus of the night and the award show. Can you nominate the same left channel for more than one category nomination? Thank you for the question, Natalie. You absolutely can. So say you like Thought Slime a lot, and you want to nominate them for several different YouTube categories, like best YouTube streamer or variety, video essay streamer. I think they've actually been nominated for that already. But say you also want to nominate a particular video of theirs for best YouTube video of the year. You can do that. If they have cross-platform creation, that's totally fine to nominate them for that as well. There's a lot of people that are big on Twitch, that have a strong following, that also have a strong following on YouTube as well. It's totally fine to nominate the same person or piece of work for as many things as it applies to. Yeah. And so yeah, just a way to have fun and expose more people to leftist work. So yeah, please come down to Left Signal Boost and cast your nominations until the end of the month. Yeah, so I just want to get that plug in there at the end. And yep, so there's that link that you can follow no matter which platform you're looking at right now. I should put that up as a caption as well. But no time for that right now. But you can follow all my work at linktree/bread_theory, excuse me. That's linktr.ee/bread_theory. You can find all the places that I produce content and all that fun stuff. So if you're interested in following me in places that you like to hang out, whatever platform that is, there's a good chance that I have a presence there as well. So go ahead and follow that. And you can also find links to the Lefties Award nomination process as well. I believe I've finally added that. And if I haven't, I'll go back and I'll look at it and add it as soon as possible. But thank you all for joining me tonight. I really had a good time. For those of you joining me on Twitch, we're going to raid into someone now. And I think probably just going to pick someone. That's what I like to do on Sunday nights. And I hope to see you for my theory stream coming up this Wednesday, where we'll be finishing up State and Revolution by Vladimir Lenin. We'll do the final chapter with the For We Are Many podcast. We're going to do a co-stream together. It's always a good time. I always learn something, especially when I have more guests on. So that's been great to do. So it's going to be this Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. We're going to dive into the final chapter of State and Revolution. And then we're going to move on to a new book, and I don't know exactly which one I'm going to pick yet. I'm thinking about perhaps the ABC of Anarchy. And of course, the author escapes me at the moment, but it's a well-known anarchist who wrote that one. But we're going to go back to an anarchy piece of theory regardless, because I switch back and forth between anarchy and communist theory. So look forward to that as well. Perhaps Gromsterino tonight. Radical Links, Dr. Hume out. Who are we going to pick? If anyone has a suggestion, that's totally fine if you want to put that out. Oh, thanks so much. I have been nominated for Best New... I don't remember if it was Twitch channel or YouTube channel. but I've been there's a new category for each of the major categories. So YouTube, Twitch, all that sort of thing. There's a new creator category. So, but yeah, go ahead and nominate me. I'd really appreciate that as well. I'd really like that a lot. So yeah. Oh yeah. Let's find out who we're rating though. Stay on task here. Piper Pepper. I don't know what that is. I've done Freems lately, so I'm not going to do that one. Yeah, there's no point in rating into any of the really large channels because I don't usually even get a shout out for that. Let's see what Grams Torino's up to tonight. See if perhaps they are a good place to rate into. Socialism Nowhere, Politics and Gaming, Spooktober. That sounds pretty cool. So yeah, let's do Grams Torino tonight. I have never rated them before, so this will be fun. This will be definitely a fun experience. Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot, John. I really appreciate you guys who show up regularly. That means a lot. And I always appreciate the comments that you guys add and the way that we're kind of building this body of ideas and thought together. I think it's really cool. Lo-fi Michael Brooks video that I put up is fantastic. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. Yeah, I did a couple of lo-fi videos. I just took lo-fi audio that I found for free, no copyright stuff, and slapped it over a Michael Brooks speech as well as the Communist Manifesto audiobook. And it's just a different way to experience leftist ideas. I like to do more of it, but I just don't have a lot of time for that. I don't even have time to catch up on my backlog of videos to put up on YouTube lately. But eventually I'll probably get back to that. But thank you, Seize the Minis. That means a lot. All right, so for those of you not on follow me on Twitch right now, I'm gonna go ahead and just say goodnight to you. And for everyone on Twitch, let's get ready for the raid. Oh, sorry. One more thing. So we're going to raid into Grams Torino, and all of you should follow Grams Torino. So here's your chance now to follow Grams Torino. Just follow that link, and you can follow a really cool leftist Twitch streamer. It's a good one. Good night to you as well, John. Have a great rest of your evening as well, Natalie. I really appreciate you being such, diehard fans. Like, you guys are the best. I really appreciate you. All right, so here we go with Grams Torino. Lectam, everybody, and see ya, hopefully, all on Wednesday. Oh, no, I gotta put it up in here. Paste. And here we go with the raid. Oh, okay. My OBS is not working out right. I'm gonna have to restart it. So sorry. For those of you waiting for the raid to begin. Come on, OBS. Don't crash on me. All right, here we go. Now it's working. Raid Grams Torino. Make sure you tell them where you're coming from. Help support, my standing in the leftist community. It's always appreciated.